Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the fanfiction guy. Back with another fanfiction. This is the first part of What If Deku Saves Dying Cat? Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. There is a starving cat living in the dark streets, with no one to care for it, and walking by, a boy lost to the world, whose dull eyes scramble for a reason to hold on. There, right in front of him, his dim eyes stare back at him. Where there used to be emerald irises so bright and cheery is now a vicious glare. It hasn't always been like this. Life had come, with its dozen clever tricks to take the good out of anything and everything. The wrong things had happened at the wrong time, and as he had sunk down further and further again, the dark pockets beneath his eyes had too. "I can't do this anymore," he whispers lamely. He wants to shout. He feels too full of rage for everything. Why is it the world keeps treating him so terribly? Why can the people around him not care a little more? Or a little less? His throat bubbles up with insults, replies to venomous comments he'd gotten today and over the years. His chest, so heavy and full, might have burst open and torn his chest apart any moment. It cannot get any worse, any more painful, he thinks. Yet somehow it always does. "I hate you. I hate you so much." He has never dared hate anyone before, but he can no longer care. Nothing seems to matter anymore, anyways. He'd heard before that it's better to use you instead of when talking to oneself to reinforce positive ideas. He guesses the effect would work when spitting insults at one's reflection. "Why do you always do this?" He grips the counter until his knuckles turn ghostly white, and then he holds it tight. "You always ruin everything and no one needs you. You've constructed this idea in your head that people need you, that you can help them, save them. But it's not true, Izuku, and you know. You've known since day one it was never true." Suddenly, a laugh erupts from his throat, only a chuckle at first, and then it rapidly takes more volume, and his throat feels raw, and his eyes sting. The boy wipes at the tears that would not stop flowing, and then gives up when his efforts show futile. "You're going mad, Izuku. You're going totally insane, and you're useless about your fate. Just how more pathetic can you get?" "Izuku?" his mother calls from the kitchen. Izuku startles, pulled so suddenly back into the real world. "Dinner's ready." Everything had looked so dark looking into his own eyes, his vision darkened around the edges. Now it looked too bright, with the unnatural white lights hanging from the bathroom ceiling. Izuku clears his throat from the knot that begins forming. "I am not really hungry," he calls back. Glancing back at his reflection, Izuku thinks the image in the mirror looks so far away. Like it couldn't be real, couldn't be him. He turns on the water faucet and splashes some cold water onto his face, hoping it might help do something. It doesn't. "Are you sure?" his mother asks, worry laced in her voice. There's a pause, where Izuku is left wondering what to say, which excuse to use. He's already used so many this week alone. But then the woman adds, "I made katsudon." He thinks, biting his lip. He knows, then, that if he tells her one more excuse, she would know something was wrong. But that would be a lie, because everything is all right. Everything is fine, he tells himself, glaring back at his own reflection. "I'll be there in a minute," he called back, splashing some more water on his face. Dinner is awkward. It always is lately. His mother fidgeting in her seat, smiling at him on the rare occasion he looks up. Izuku takes his chopsticks, turning over the pork and then once more. It smells good and he's hungry, but he feels sick at the thought of having to swallow anything. "High school applications are due soon, aren't they? Your teachers sent a letter," his mother explains, anxiously. She takes another bite, and Izuku thinks that's the end of it, that it was all she had to say. "I've heard the high school near Aldera had a good reputation for." Izuku cuts her off, coughing slightly. I thought I'd try for you." He placed his chopsticks down and slowly lifted his gaze to meet his mother's sad eyes. "Of course," she replies, almost dismissively. She leans forward and places her hand on his own. "But, Izuku." "Well, it's always good to have many options laid out in front of you." She licks her lips and stops for a moment, searching for her words. "And you know, If things don't go as planned, at least you'll. I know, Mom. He replies. The light above the sink in the kitchen flickers once, twice. It'll work though. His mother stares at him for a long moment, offering a small smile that doesn't quite reach her eyes. Of course. He's worthless, someone laughs above him. Izuku can't quite make out who it is, but he can feel the kicks to his side. 1, 2, 3 counting doesn't make it hurt any less. There's more than one person sneering insults above him, but Izuku's head feels too dizzy to tell how many, and he cannot think at the moment of anything else but the pain blooming in his side. Look at him, another says, it's pathetic. Won't even fight back. And you're 4 or maybe more against 1, Izuku thinks. And yet he knows that they're right, that it's his own fault if he's gotten in this mess in the first place. Hadn't been quiet enough when he'd gotten up after classes were over. Hadn't been quick enough to gather his things and walk down the halls. Hadn't been able to see the people following behind until it was too late, and he was pushed to the ground in a corner hidden from the sun. Izuku feels hands on him, pulling the straps of his backpack off his shoulder and down his arms. He tries to hold on to it, tries to reach out a hand and grab the side of the thorn and yellow thing, but then a foot comes crashing down on his fingers, pressing them down against the tiny rocks splattered onto the ground. He can't help the cry that escapes his mouth as the foot digs harder onto his hand, the guy chuckling in response. The students surrounding him talk and sneer, maybe insulting him, or talking about the weather. Izuku can't make out half the words they say over the ringing in his head. Someone grabs a handful of his hair harshly and suddenly Izuku is aware, unfortunately. And then, right in front of his eyes, everything stored in his backpack falls to the ground. The hell is that? One of the guys asks, a smile in his voice. Izuku lifts his head slightly and manages to catch a glimpse of his notebook. Dude, oh my god. The other teens crowd around the one holding the booklet, and they all laugh as they flip through the thing. Guys, effing creep. Don't it's? Izuku swallows thickly, it's not yours. He wishes a hole would open up under him, swallow him whole, only just so he wouldn't have to feel what he feels now. This shame, this embarrassment of being on the ground and treated as lesser than. Is that? It is. Another bursts out laughing, and then all of them are pulling on the notebook. Are you stalking Bakugu or something? No. He totally is, that's so effed up. They ignore him, going back to flipping through his stuff or something, but then he hears the sound of paper ripping. Just wait till he sees this. There's still a foot holding Izuku's palm flat against the ground, and his other one had been wrapped around his head protectively, as if it'd do anything to help. And before he can think better of it, his free hand shoots out to grab the first thing he can find, which turns out to be an ankle. His fingers barely graze the fabric of the random teen's pants, but it's enough to get a reaction out of them. What the F? So quick, he doesn't even see it coming. A foot collides against the side of his face, sending his head facing the other side. Izuku is too tired to move. He should just stop, not do anything. Stay here. It's all quiet again, and the ringing in his ears is back tenfold. Did you effing kill him? What if arrested? Don't want anything to do with this sheet. Izuku's world goes dark. Walking. That's what Izuku's been trying to do for the past hour or so. Trying because his head hurts like hell and he's pretty sure he's broken something near his ribs. To be fair, he doesn't remember much of what happened after he tried to fight back, almost. It must have looked so pathetic. There's some sticky substance stuck to his forehead, hot and tickling to the side of his face. He brings his hand up to it and his fingers come back tinted red. Maybe he shouldn't have done that. Now he can't touch anything or else it'll get all bloody. Izuku keeps walking, not paying mind to the people staring at his slight limp. For a while, his reddened hand is just awkwardly hovering to the side, and when finally the blood dries, Izuku starts to pick at the blood stuck in his curls, watching it crumble into dust. It's not late, not really. The sun's still up, or at least, it's just beginning to set. So that means he probably wasn't unconscious for too long. It's not like anyone would care if... And Izuku's mind drifts. What? If he'd stayed there, stayed put, and hadn't gotten up? What are you thinking, Izuku? Those kids would probably be blamed for everything and then they'd have their lives ruined. It's so selfish. You're so selfish. Mom would care. Would she? Izuku is pulled out of his thoughts when he hears a soft thump in the alley he just walked past. He could continue, he should, but it makes him stop. Maybe I'm imagining stuff, he thinks. After all, he did hit his head pretty hard. But then, there's no harm in checking, right? Slowly, going back one step and then two, Izuku peers out into the dark alley. And surely, right there, on the ground, curled up inside a damp box, he sees a cat. The first thing he notices is the way the small creature shivers, its fur wet as if it had been submerged in water not so long ago. Izuku tries a tentative step towards it, and then the kitten? It looks so small, looks up, standing up abruptly and cowering into the far corner of the tiny box. Sorry, Izuku breathes out, holding his hands up, unsure if it might help or not. He wonders if he should leave, just so the cat might feel better. So it might not feel trapped. Izuku knows the feeling all too well. But leaving it here, it'll die. The sky's already getting thick with gray clouds, and the night most likely won't be kind. Whether it's a kitten or not, it still looks terribly malnourished. I only want to help, he whispers. It feels silly talking to a cat like this. But at the same time, he holds his breath as he begins to reach his hand out, waiting for a reaction, and relaxing when the cat doesn't move. It looks so small, so cold. It's shaking, but it's barely noticeable next to Izuku's own aching and freezing fingers. Suddenly, the cat nuzzles its face into Izuku's palm, and it is then that the boy knows he won't be able to leave it there. So, he carefully tries to pick it up, ever so gently. And as he does, the creature brings its claws up to Izuku's face and scratches him deep into his cheek. Izuku lets out a pained cry. He had tried to avoid the claws, but they had still managed to scratch the side of his face. Oh, why'd you do that? He holds it at arm's length, far from his face, and then both the cat and Izuku stare at each other for a moment. When the small animal seems to have calmed enough, the teen dares bring it near his chest again. It curls up in his arms and doesn't move again. The boy scoffs at the weird mood swing. Let's get out of here, he says. Taking a moment to look around, making sure that no one is there, an odd feeling forms inside his chest. He doesn't know whether it's the cat or just the air around him, but no matter, the warmth in his arms makes him forget about it. Izuku walks home that night, his body aching and bleeding, a cat just as miserable as he curled up in his arms. You got me pretty good, huh? Izuku whispers to himself, his reflection in the mirror staring back at him. When he'd gotten home, his mother had already been asleep in front of the TV. He had tried not to make any sound. He didn't want her to see him all bloodied like this if he could avoid it. The cat's scratch had been deeper than he'd thought, and now that his face was starting to warm up again, he could feel it burning. He brings up a piece of cotton tinged with alcohol up to the gashes and hisses sharply, squeezing his eyes shut and propping his elbows on the edge of the sink. But more than that, every glimpse of himself he catches in the mirror serves as another reminder of today's events. Look at him, it's pathetic. Won't even fight back. His side hurts too, but there's nothing he can do to make it feel better. He wonders if he'll still be limping tomorrow. The tip of his hair is red with blood near the place he's been hit and knocked unconscious. As Izuku gets into the burning shower, the cat stays put on the rug in the corner of the bathroom, licking its paws. It has been overall quite a terrible day, but every day feels that way now, except usually it isn't as painful physically. The water rushes down his back, so hot it feels as though it could peel off a layer of his skin, and between his feet, the red-tinged water runs down the drain. And yet, the cat on the other side of the room makes the weight on his chest feel just a little more bearable. It isn't until Izuku finally slumps down on his bed that his head starts to ache. Well, it had hurt before, but now it feels different, like some kind of pressure, something making it seem like there was too much in his head to contain, and it would only be a matter of time until it burst. Izuku lets out a groan, bringing his hands to rub his temples, although the pain is everywhere. The cat had found itself a comfortable spot just at the end of Izuku's bed, surrounded by a pile of the teen's clothing he had yet to pick up. I don't feel right, he mumbles. It is an odd thing, to not feel right, when life itself often feels like a bad joke, something that does not seem real, like he would eventually wake up from all of this bullshit. But this is the world. everything outside the comfort of his loneliness. Now, this feeling of wrongness creeps inside of him, and Izuku does not know what to make of it. The cat simply answers with a quiet meow. The thing is, Izuku feels exhausted. So tired. Today's events begin to blur inside Izuku's head, and the next morning, he does not remember exactly what happened. He cannot explain why his body hurts all over, and why there's so much dried blood under his fingernails, only fuzzy faces, sneers, laughter, panic, and a cat. But Izuku also does not hear the voice asking him, "Izuku, there's a why is there a cat?" Something about the cat he had found. And he does not feel the hands reaching for him, "Please don't touch me," and shaking him, slightly and then getting more and more frantic, as he shows no sign of waking up. "Izuku!" The boy in question lets out a small groan, trying to pull away from the hands shaking him. He mumbles something, or at least he must have, because the grip on his arms softens. "Izuku, you scared me," the voice sighs. Izuku hears his bed frame creak and feels a weight pushing on his mattress next to him. "I thought." A quiet yawn, then silence. "I just got back from my shift, I'm just tired." "You're usually up at this time," she says, and then Izuku might have thought she'd left if not for the warmth next to him. "Izuku? Are you feeling okay?" "Mom?" Slowly, Izuku creaks one eye open, grateful for the darkness still in his room. He ignores her question, "What time is it?" "School doesn't start until another half hour, so his mother is interrupted by another yawn, "You'll be fine if you're quick." Half an hour. Izuku would need to leave in less than maybe 5 minutes to be able to make it to class in time. On any other day, it would have been all right, if maybe a bit tight. But today, Izuku feels heavy, like his body has become tied down to his current position for who knows how long. He'd stay like this forever if he could. His mother would worry, but strangely it doesn't seem to matter so much right now. "Are you sure you're all right?" She asks for the second time now. Izuku can't quite make out the face she's making with only the dim light emerging from the hallway, but her voice is soft and gentle, like she was talking down a wild animal. The memory of a cat clawing at his face flashes in his mind. He instinctively brings up his hand to his cheek, feeling the wound just beginning to heal. "Yeah," he whispers, "I'll be up in a bit." His mother hesitates, "If you're sure." After a few seconds have passed, she stands up, and upon reaching the door frame, she stops. "Oh, and Izuku?" she says, to which he hums in response. "We'll need to talk about that cat when you come back from school later." The teen sits up, glancing over at the cat curled up near his feet. He gives his mother a small nod, and she leaves to go get her own rest. Izuku runs his hand down his face, confused about just about everything. His head feels empty and yet so full, although the headache has lessened slightly overnight. Slowly he stands, reaching for his uniform sprawled on the floor, and putting it on. It's ruffled in every corner of the fabric, with small spots of dried blood near the collar. It's still fuzzy how it got there in the first place, but the throbbing on his head gives him a rough idea. It doesn't really matter, though. Who's going to notice, anyway? The cat stays curled up on his bed, its chest rising up and down steadily. The corner of Izuku's mouth quirks up sadly. "I really have to find you a name soon, huh?" There's no response. Putting the fact his body hurts everywhere, and that he has what might be the worst headache he has ever experienced in his life, things aren't so bad. It's just this feeling of wrongness, but it might as well be better than his usual morning self-loathing. Quickly, Izuku finds a plastic bowl and fills it with tap water. What do cats even eat? He guesses it won't really matter to a cat who has probably spent several weeks or maybe months on the streets. He takes out some of the leftover salmon from a few days ago, quickly placing it on a plate. He brings both the water and the hopefully still good fish back to his room, only now realizing it's starting to get dangerously late, and puts it down on the floor for the cat, before closing the door on his way out. He grabs his yellow backpack. No time now. He grabs the nearest energy bar, it's just sugar, and runs out the door. Well, things don't seem bad, at least they don't until he actually steps out of the apartment and the blinding light causes actual pain to his eyes. Nothing he can do about the sun, unfortunately. Izuku tries to adjust his eyes by squinting and closing his eyes every few seconds as he tries to go down the stairs as quickly as possible. Damn it, Izuku, he curses under his breath, you'll never make it in time now. Pushing past the throbbing in his head and the pain behind his eyes and pretty much everywhere on his body, Izuku hurries on the path to school, avoiding tripping about a dozen times and falling twice. When Izuku finally makes it, the school is silent and the hall's empty. Still, he heads straight to his classroom, but stalls at the door. He would have rather stayed home today. Izuku slides the door open. In an instant, all eyes turn to him, and cold sweat starts trickling down his neck. For some unknown reason, the light coming from the windows facing him make anger bubble in his chest. Midoriya, his teacher interrupts his train of thought, bored expression on his face. You finally decided to join us. The green-haired teen stares at the man, no words forming in his mouth. What is he even supposed to say? Usually, he might have been able to come up with a fairly believable excuse, but right now he doesn't know. His teacher must have noticed Izuku wouldn't have anything else to say, but still, a frown appeared on his forehead. I expect you've at least had the time to finish your homework, he says, looking at Izuku with heavy eyelids. The homework? Sorry. There had been an assignment. Izuku had always completed them right away, there's no way he would have forgotten to do it. He searched his memory for a hint of what it could have been, but the throbbing was still there, making his head hurt. Suddenly, he remembers vaguely the clattering sound of all his backpack's content falling to the ground. The pressure inside his skull worsens. Fingers snapping make him look up, the static in his ears being replaced by the hushed conversations and giggles of his classmates. Hello, Earth to Midoriya? Izuku swallows thickly. I lost it, Sensei. You lost it. The man repeats, drawing out the words slowly, almost as if he finds the possibility amusing. Oh, that is quite unfortunate. He clears his throat awkwardly. If that's the case, then I'm sure you won't have a problem telling the class how that might have happened. Couldn't the guy just dismiss him already? Even in this weakened state, Izuku isn't stupid. He feels his face become red with maybe shame or embarrassment. To top it off, everyone is looking at him like he was lying, but he truly doesn't know where this stupid assignment had gone, or it was more that Izuku couldn't remember for the life of him when they'd been given anything. I don't remember, he mumbles pitifully. The silence is thick in the room. His teacher pinches the bridge of his nose and lets out a dreadfully heavy sigh. After a bit, the man says, You know I don't accept delays, Midoriya. I know, Sensei, but no exceptions. You know the rules, 0 on this assignment. He writes something down on the nearest sheet of paper with a red pen. Now, if you're done bothering the class with your inability to arrive on time, then go to your seat. Izuku quickly does as he's told, trying his best not to crumble under all the eyes glued on him, with quiet snickers and hushed voices. He notices Kaken staring at him with an unreadable expression, but the teen turns his head before Izuku has the chance to understand it. After that, the hour stretches. He keeps his head down during most of it. When he'd opened his backpack to take out his notebook, he hadn't seen what he'd been looking for. Instead, he'd found all of his usually neatly placed papers all crumpled up, with dust and dirt smudged all over them. They had been shoved in there in a hurry, he could tell that much, but that is just so unlike Izuku. Even when he would be running short on time, he would always make sure to place his belongings in a way that wouldn't damage them. Another level. Suddenly, he feels a piece of paper hit the back of his head, sticking in his curls. He doesn't turn around to see who had thrown it, the snickers behind tell him enough. Rummaging through the mess that is his backpack, Izuku found his pencil case, but not his notebook. His teacher called out his name, annoyed with all the paper ruffling, and Izuku straightened while muttering an apology. He'd have to look for it later. The bell rings, and every student starts gathering their things, chairs scraping the floor and backpacks clipping and zipping. Midoriya, stay after class. His teacher says. Hesitantly, Izuku sits back down, averting his gaze from the curious ones of the other teens. He waits until the classroom empties, and a bit longer when his teacher simply stays at his own desk, writing something down again. If he didn't know better, Izuku might have thought the man had forgotten his presence. Midoriya, his teacher calls, not bothering to look up from whatever it is he's doing. Izuku stands, a bit too abruptly, and loses his balance slightly, but no one notices. He makes his way over to the man's larger desk, gripping his backpack straps tightly. A sigh escapes the man's lips, and he runs a hand down his face. He doesn't say anything, though, which only serves to confuse the teen even more. Midoriya, he repeats. We've already talked about this. Izuku frowns. What do you mean? You know what I mean, his teacher bites back as if offended. He redresses himself in his seat before continuing. This isn't the first time you get into fights. Provoking your classmates, getting hurt, this won't lead you anywhere. And now your grades are starting to drop too. Sensei, I don't do it on purpose. It's not me who starts. Midoriya, the man cuts him off. I'm trying to help you here, but you're making it a bit hard for me. Izuku shuts his mouth at that. Help him? Help him do what? He clearly won't listen that Izuku isn't actually the one starting the fights, and even less that he barely ever gets to fight. Look, his teacher sighs. High school applications are going to be starting soon. You already don't have many options with a record like yours, so it's best that you get yourself together now if you even want to attend. You hear me? His record. What a joke. Nothing in there could be true. Sometimes, even his grades were lower than Izuku knew they should be. He'd checked a couple of times in the past and confirmed his theory by comparing his answers to whatever people near had got. One time, he'd even gone up to a teacher about it, pointing out that, yes, here, it's supposed to be correct, and they told him they would check. A few days later, he'd gotten his copy back with an even lower grade. Izuku grits his teeth, dropping his head low. Yes, Sensei. He can't even say anything. It's pathetic. It's infuriating. But Izuku doesn't get to be angry, not now, and probably not ever. Suddenly, a wave of nausea overwhelms Izuku. He feels his face becoming pale, his vision blurring in places it shouldn't. But I'm glad we could come to a mutual understanding. His teacher goes on, having the audacity to smile. You know, I think you could truly improve if you learn to be a bit more mindful and respectful towards. Izuku clamps a hand over his mouth. Sorry, sir, since I really need to. He doesn't finish his sentence, instead bolting out the door and heading towards the bathroom. He knows a few people are staring at him as he passes them by, but he couldn't care any less. Although he does briefly make eye contact with Kaken, it doesn't last long. He pushes the bathroom door open and goes straight into one of the stalls. It's unclear what Izuku has done to deserve this, and yet he can't help but wonder why it's happening to him of all people. He retches his stomach's contents out, or at least what little amount there had been in the first place. He jinks when there's nothing left to throw up, resting his forehead on the arm set on the toilet seat. Weakly, he reaches for the handle to flush his mess. As if his luck couldn't get any worse, the door opens. Izuku hazily stands on wobbly feet and locks his stall, holding his breath not to make any sound. The person washes their hands, for what seems to be like an awfully long time, and then, nothing at all. Quite literally. The person doesn't leave, doesn't move. Izuku starts to think he might have imagined it. Then the bell rings, and whoever had been there cursed before exiting the place. Izuku realizes it'd be pretty bad if he'd be late twice in a day, but he still waits a few seconds to make sure he's really alone before leaving his stall. Weirdly enough, no one had bothered Izuku today after that, aside from the whispers that definitely weren't compliments, and the occasional sneers. Not that Izuku wants to complain. In fact, he's glad that people haven't messed with him today, hopes maybe it's a sign they're getting bored of him. There had just been something off about the way they all looked at him. Izuku unlocks the apartment door, his hand hovering over the handle. He shakes his head, trying to rationalize that there's nothing to worry about, it's Mom, but makes his headache worse doing so. I'm home, he calls out, waiting for a response. When he doesn't hear one, he removes his shoes and slips on his slippers, and heads for the medicine cabinet in the bathroom. Painkillers should do, right? Well, he has nothing to lose. He hadn't had the time to bring some this morning, and hadn't been able to find any in his backpack, although he always made sure to bring extra, so his entire body had ached today, especially his ribs. He's worthless. There's feet jabbing his sides, and Izuku can't move out of the way. His breath keeps being knocked right out of his chest. Izuku frowns at the thought. Memory? He can't tell. They feel so distant and fuzzy, he might as well be making up fake scenarios inside his head. It doesn't matter, anyways. Nothing matters, he decides. He goes inside his room, and the small black cat jumps in surprise, arching its back. Izuku mumbles a small apology, somehow making the creature relax, if only a bit. It goes back to doing whatever it had previously been doing, which Izuku guesses had probably been curling up right where he had left the cat this morning. Lucky, he whispers, a tiny smile tugging at his lips. With his curtains closed and the lack of lights in his room, he can finally rest his eyes. After having had to go through an entire day of squinting and putting a hand over his eyes as he wrote on loose sheets of paper. Carefully, Izuku sits down next to the cat on his bed, resting his back against the wall. Taking his chance, he brings out a hand to pet the small animal on the back. It immediately springs up to grab his wrist, pain blooming on his skin there, but Izuku barely reacts or even notices it. Hey, I'm not trying to hurt you, he sighs, detaching the cat from where it had dug its claws. The cat lets him, and then it goes back to liking said claws, pressing its side to Izuku. The teen takes it as an invitation to pet him, so he tentatively reaches out again and smiles when the animal begins to purr. This is nice, he thinks, even though it feels so mundane. Maybe that's why. His door creaks open, and his mother quietly waves at him. Izuku, welcome back, she greets. Her eyes fall on the cat, kitten, next to Izuku's lap. She sighs, opening her mouth to speak, but he cuts her off first. Mom, I know what you're going to say, but Izuku's words fail him. He had not, in fact, known what she was going to say, but he did know he would not like it. I found it in an alley, I couldn't just stand there and do nothing. He watches as his mother's expression contorts into one of utmost pity. Izuku, I know. You've always had a heart too big for this world. She chuckles sadly. His mom makes her way over to his bed and sits down on the spot next to him. He doesn't want to look at her, because now he knows what she's going to say. Whenever she has to deny him something, she always starts by saying how he's too kind, too gentle, too much of something. Izuku, she continues, softly. I know you like this cat, but you know the apartment building doesn't allow any pets. Even then, look at you. She cups his face with one hand, tracing the scratch from the day before, making him wince slightly. It hurt you already. It's not its fault. No, I know. All of a sudden, Izuku feels a wave of irritation hit him, his chest filling with a fit of uncalled anger. You say that, but you don't really mean it, he snaps, dropping his head and wrapping his hand around his temples, as if trying to contain the pressure. You're barely there, you know, it's not like it would matter if we had a cat around. Izuku's heart leaps in his throat the moment the words leave his mouth. He knows his mother is trying her hardest, that it's not her fault no one else will take the night shifts, even though they pay slightly more. In a quiet voice, his mother replies, You know that's not what this is about. Well, what do you suggest? That I should just put it back where I found it? No, of course not, but Izuku, we can't keep it. She places a hand on his shoulder. It might be sick, after having spent so much time on the streets. We can't just risk that. It looks fine, Izuku mumbles. Even he doesn't quite believe his own words, turning his head to get a glimpse of the clearly starved cat. He couldn't deny she had made a good point. Listen, she begins, how about this? I'll get an appointment, and we'll see what we do from there after that, yeah? Izuku nods, his hands sliding down his face. His mother must have confused it for relief, but the throbbing head just keeps getting worse. She stands up, smiling. Good. Maybe you should add some light in here to get rid of the gloomy atmosphere, she joked, flipping the light switch on, but her face fell immediately. What happened to your face? The boy frowns. The cat. No, the bruise on your face. She starts reaching out a hand, but Izuku recoils from her touch. I just fell yesterday. It's really not that serious. He attempts to smile reassuringly, but he can tell from the grimace his mother makes that it doesn't convince her fully. Still, she retracts her arm. If you say so. She leaves not too long after that, to Izuku's relief. Izuku hates himself for having to make her worry all the time, but this cat is the only thing that's made him happy in months. He can't just give this up. It's so selfish. But then again, Izuku's always been like that, hasn't he? There is a cat with blood-coated claws. Found and befriended by one as lost as it. His skin bleeds an angry red, but he thinks it might be better than the numbness in his heart. A week passes, and life is as still as ever. Izuku does not feel better. If anything, his head keeps on getting worse, and he thinks he might have underestimated the severity of his injuries. The next time Izuku catches a glance of himself in the mirror, the lights are dimmed. He finds it too annoying, like a bug flying too close to your ear, but he still manages to see it. Right there on his ribs, a giant purple bruise swells over the weirdly formed spot. Izuku tentatively puts his hand over it and hisses before pulling back. He hadn't paid attention before, and his head was too fuzzy to be aware of anything. But now, the pain in his ribs is starting to overweigh his headache. He realizes that it's not his skin that's weird. No, it's more what's under, as if it were poking the inside of his skin. Oh God, he had broken his ribs. Not that it surprised him, but usually they didn't do this. Sometimes, if he was lucky enough, he would even be able to wait it out. It doesn't look good at all, and Izuku has no clue what to do. In his panic, Izuku scrambles for his phone, trying to look up, what if broken bone is left untreated, and pales when he sees results popping up of risk of infection, or internal bleeding. Izuku is no doctor, he's just a middle school student. And normally, for someone his age, the logical thing to do is to go see a doctor. But then, they'd probably ask him questions, and his mother would worry even more. No, he can't go to the hospital, not yet at least. So instead, Izuku searches for ways to heal it himself. He scrunches his face even more when the only results he finds are pneumonia, severe pain, and death. After a while of just staring at his phone defeatedly, his screen goes black. It's the middle of the night, so he decides that maybe it's time he goes to bed. Izuku's nights aren't as peaceful as the first one after the incident. He's still not sure what to call it. His mind has started piecing the events back together slowly, but it all still feels very blurry, like trying to remember a dream. Speaking of dreams, he can't manage to stay asleep long enough to dream of anything. He wakes up at the most random hours and can't fall asleep at night, but spends the day yawning and daydreaming. It was only a matter of time until exhaustion caught up to him. Izuku would have stayed in bed this morning. Truly, he would have, which is strange because on any other week, the thought alone would have startled him enough to give him a heart attack. But today is different because they're supposed to receive their high school applications. He can't miss it. He doesn't even have a good enough excuse. Oh, sorry, my head hurt, and I think I broke my ribs, but I didn't go to the hospital. Yeah, no, Izuku cringes at the thought. So instead, he sits up in his bed, his hand hovering over the blooming bruise on his ribs, scared to touch it. He glances at his alarm clock, red glowing numbers glaring back at him. It's early. Too early. And yet, he stands up anyways, glancing at the back sleeping on his bed. These past few days, Izuku had noticed just how little the cat actually moved, how little things it did. It barely eats, barely drinks, barely moves except for adding another scratch on Izuku's skin. The boy frowns, wondering if maybe his mom is right about the cat being sick, and he frowns. Putting on his shirt, Izuku is careful to avoid touching the bruise spot, but even when the fabric barely grazes his skin, pain flares up. He reaches for the painkillers on his nightstand and goes to pour his usual 2 inside the palm of his hand, but nothing falls. He shakes the bottle frustratingly and then realizes it's empty. This day is going to be so long, he thinks, as tears start to prickle in the corner of his eyes. It's so stupid crying for something like this. It's nothing you haven't done before, Izuku. But everything feels like it's too much. Everything is always too much. And so, Izuku quietly muffles his sobs, worsening his pain when his chest heaves and hiccups, making him cry even more in turn. It doesn't stop until he feels nauseous and has to rush to the bathroom to throw up everything he'd eaten the day before. Through his haze, most of what's happening around Izuku is blocked out in a way. On his way to school, he doesn't notice heroes patrolling like he sometimes does. He also doesn't read as much hero news as he usually does either. But still, some things are just hard to miss, even in a state like his. Kaken has been acting weird lately. Just yesterday morning, when Izuku arrived at school, he saw the explosive teen waiting at Izuku's locker. He can't think of any reason as to why Kaken would be there. His locker isn't even anywhere close to Izuku's. In the end, Izuku hadn't lingered long enough to find out. He doesn't think it could have been anything pleasant, anyways. Then there's the staring. Kaken, who would normally never pass up an opportunity to make fun of Izuku during class, hadn't addressed him a single time this week. Not once. It should be a good thing that Kaken hadn't done anything, and maybe it is. But Izuku can't help but think there's something more to it. High school applications. Izuku is pulled out of his thoughts by his teacher joyfully passing out papers to the students. It only lasts a second, but the teen catches the man looking at him, eyebrows raised and eyes looking at him expectantly. He remembers the conversation he'd had with his teacher earlier this week. High school applications are going to be starting soon. You already don't have many options with a record like yours, so it's best that you get yourself together now if you even want to attend. You hear me? When he takes the sheet in his hands, Izuku holds his breath. He'd been waiting for this for so long now, had been looking forward to finally writing in big bold letters with confidence. He'd expected excitement, joy, maybe even relief. Finally, it would be his moment to say, "I'm doing it anyways," showing anyone who didn't believe in him, no one ever had, that Izuku does not give up. Sitting here now though, Izuku doesn't feel much of anything. He feels pain in his ribs, inside his skin. He feels the uncomfortable chair on his back, feels the throbbing in his head. I thought I'd try for you. Of course. But, Izuku. Well, it's always good to have many options laid out in front of you. His mother had told him. And if things don't go as planned, at least you'll. I know, Mom. What if he doesn't make it? Or what if he does, but he always ends up being in pain like he is right now? He couldn't even fight back against? Who had attacked him again? It doesn't matter, Izuku thinks as he shakes his head. He looks back down at the paper sitting in front of him, tapping his pencil rapidly against his desk. He glances behind him and catches Kaken staring at him again. He quickly looks away. It'll work though. He remembers telling his mother. Izuku isn't sure if he believes it anymore. With a shaky hand, he writes his name on the paper, the date, everything that needs to be filled, except for the chosen high school. He stares at the case for a long moment, and the empty squares stare back at him glaringly. For all his life, Izuku had never considered being anything other than a hero. It had always been the only possible outcome for him. Now that doubt had begun crippling inside his chest, all the way to his throat, Izuku doesn't know anymore. Being in this classroom, it feels as if everyone is burning holes into his back, whispering and laughing and mocking him. Would it be any better if he ends up in a hero school? It might be even worse. Everyone will hate him, no matter where he ends up. But being surrounded by people who hate him and that have powerful quirks, this does matter. And his mother, he knows she doesn't want him to go. She's been trying to talk him into applying to the closest school possible, the simplest option. Yet here he is, wanting to apply to a school to which he most definitely won't get a scholarship to, and that will cause his mother even more stress and be more expensive. If Izuku wasn't there, his mom would be able to live so much more easily. She wouldn't have to worry so much all the time. If it wasn't for the cat he has to feed right now, he would be better off. Izuku folds the sheet of paper and stuffs it into his backpack. It's Friday, and the classes are over. Izuku can finally sigh in relief. He's not sure if the week had been unusually unbearably long because of his headache and his broken ribs, but well, screw that, he's pretty certain that it didn't help at all. At least now he can finally go home and sleep through the entire weekend. Or at least try. And who knows? Maybe if he's lucky, his bones will magically heal. He'd read that sleeping upright can help heal broken ribs. Or something. But he knows he has terrible luck too. Izuku stops at a convenience store on his way back home, remembering that he ran out of painkillers today. Actually, he hadn't forgotten. He'd been in pain all day. Even now, it's a bit hard to breathe if he doesn't take small inhales and slow exhales. His leg, which doesn't bother him much when he's sitting, hurts every time he takes a step, but is easy to ignore if Izuku tries hard enough. The guy at the counter doesn't bother looking up from his phone as Izuku pushes the door open, the ding of the bell overhead echoing in the small store. He lowers his head to avoid having to look at the white lights above. It's not the first time he comes here to buy medicines, so he heads straight for the row at the back where he knows he can find them. A minute later, as Izuku is debating which medicine would be best, and what he can afford with what little money he had on him, he hears a group of people walking by the store, speaking and laughing loudly. Pain flares up in his skull, as if someone had kicked him right in the head. And then he remembers faces. Boys his age, his class even. It's still blurry, like looking through glasses that don't have the right vision, but the moments he sees them outside the store, he just knows that they're the ones who attacked him. The door of the store opens, and Izuku's heart jumps in his throat, panic settling deep into his stomach. His heartbeat picks up so fast that it hurts to breathe, and it does nothing to help the pain on his side when Izuku crouches down so fast he almost falls. Could have sworn I saw him come in here. He hears a voice speak. Are they looking for me? He wonders, all the blood draining from his face. He strains his ear closer to the racks. Doesn't matter, I guess. I don't think he even remembers. Remember what? Another snaps angrily. Kaken. Nothing, Bakugu, just some stupid inside joke. A boy laughs it off, and Kaken seems to drop the subject. The rest of the conversation is hard to hear with his heart beating so loudly. For a moment, he's scared that it might give him away. The ringing in his ear doesn't help either. Feet scutter at the front of the store, and he hears the beep of a scan, then more muffled conversations. The green-haired boy doesn't let himself relax until he hears the bell of the door opening and closing again. He counts in his head to 10 after they've left before letting out a sigh of relief, and immediately cringes when his chest tightens. Deku. Izuku jumps, turning his head faster than he ever has before and knocking his head against the cold racks in the process, making him hiss in pain. A few boxes of medicine fall on his head as he reaches to put a hand on his head. Kikeken, he cuts himself off, unsure what to say. He thinks he must look ridiculous, sitting in a pile of painkillers, staring up at his childhood friend like a kicked puppy. For a moment, neither of them says anything. It's so awkward, Izuku wonders if the blonde will just go if he waits long enough, or kick him. Instead, Kaken says, "You look like sheet." Huh. You've been acting FING weird this week, and you walk like you just got run over by a FNG car? Kaken doesn't usually talk to him like this. Well, he is insulting Izuku in a way, but it's different, somehow. Almost like he's worried. Almost. Sorry, is all Izuku can manage to say. Katsuki stares, or glares, at him. Sorry? Sorry? He questions, scoffing with a hint of disbelief in his tone. Izuku doesn't understand this Kaken right now, not with the haze in his head, or the ringing or the pain or anything and everything else. Oi effing Deku. Kaken snaps his fingers in front of Izuku's face, crouched down to be at his level. The freckled boy blinks, but doesn't know what to say. So he just gapes, staring dumbly at Kaken. He thinks he hears his childhood friend cussing under his breath and taking out his phone. Suddenly, his phone's flashlight is on. Oh no, is Kaken filming him? Izuku quickly tries to put his hand over the camera. He doesn't want anyone to see him like this. What if it gets out? But Kaken just clicks his tongue and moves his hand out of the way. I'm not going to effing hurt you, he snaps. Just stay still. But Izuku can't help but wince and blink back tears when the light is shoved into his face, right in front of his eyes. Did your dumbass get a concussion or some sheet? He questions under his breath, as though he were deep into his thoughts. What no? How would I? Izuku pushes the phone away and tries to stand, grabbing onto the shelves next to him for support. His ribs complain at the movement, sharp pain blooming on his side, and he wraps his arm around himself instinctively, gritting his teeth. Who did this, Deku? It was those extras, wasn't it? No, it looks worse than it is, he defends himself. They didn't mean it. They didn't mean it? Kaken replies, glaring and looming over him. Izuku is tired. It doesn't matter, I'm fine. Izuku purses his lips, quickly putting back the fallen boxes of medicine on the shelves clumsily. He grabs the first one he sees, not caring anymore about which one might be better. The boy turns around and continues walking the aisle, grabbing alcohol wipes and some bandages as he walks. You were cowering at the back of a store in a pile of cheap medicines, trembling like a FNG leaf. Why do you care? Izuku raises his voice, turning around swiftly to face Kaken. The blonde looks surprised for a moment before his expression settles into one of irritation. I don't, he scowls. Izuku hums, having expected this answer. Kaken doesn't say anything after that, so Izuku goes up to the guy at the counter who gives him an odd look before scanning his things. He hears Kaken storm out of the store, but he does not see that, in his hand, his childhood friend held a crumpled-up notebook with his name on it, titled, Hero Analysis for the Future Number 13. Michim. Yes, I think maybe about a week ago. Izuku's mother nods from her spot at the counter, occasionally nodding and jotting down notes on a piece of paper. I'm not sure. She is currently on the phone with a veterinary clinic, trying to get an appointment for the cat he had ended up naming Ruby because she always claws at him and makes his arms bleed. Yes, the cat was a she. His mother doesn't know the reasoning behind the name, and he didn't think it important to tell her. Occasionally, his mom looks up from her notes and smiles at Izuku, who is sitting in front of her, working on extra assignments because of the one he had missed earlier this week. Ruby lies on his thighs, resting soundly. The remaining food on their plates from dinner earlier starts to cool, most of Izuku's left untouched. They hadn't had the time to call this week because their schedules never aligned properly so that they could both be there, and so far 3 clinics had been booked or had seemed too expensive. Give me a moment. His mom covers the bottom of her phone with her palm and looks up at him. They could take a look at her tomorrow morning. I'll be at school though, Izuku frowns. I don't mind going, she replies softly. What about work? I'll come up with something, she winks at him. His mother never missed work. Never. If there wasn't an emergency, she would show up on time. She had probably even beaten a record of some sort for least vacation and sick days taken. But then again, working as a nurse required a lot of dedication. Warmth floods his chest as he realizes that his mother is willing to do this for him. He gives her a slight nod, and she returns it with a smile before confirming the date and time with the person on the other end of the call. Izuku stares down at the papers sprawled in front of him, reading and rereading words over and over again, seeing the kanjis but not understanding what they mean. He tries to do it slowly, has been doing this for the past half hour, but nothing works. He begins writing something but erases it immediately. Frustrated, he tugs at his hair with one hand, trying to grab the pressure in his head somehow, but it feels like his skull is about to burst. After he had gotten home from the convenience store, he had thought back to what Kaken had said about him having a concussion. It would make an awful lot of sense. Especially now that he remembers a bit more clearly what happened, he thinks it's likely he had hit his head on the concrete hard enough and had passed out. Izuku excuses himself from the table, telling his mother he's feeling tired in a hushed voice. She answers with a quiet goodnight as she finishes her call. Tomorrow he'll have school again, unfortunately. Every moment he spends there is horrible and painfully long, but it's been this way for as long as he can remember. Not that it makes things easier. Shutting the bathroom door behind him, Izuku stares at the boy looking back at him in the mirror, wondering how he ever got here, where he might have gone wrong to deserve this. Now that Kaken has pointed out his very much possible concussion, he can't quite get it out of his head. Sure, he could deal with a few broken ribs, but now there's this too? Are concussions even dangerous? He wonders to himself, leaning up closer to the mirror to observe his eyes, which he now realizes are weirdly big and a bit unequal. Not that he can do much about it now, but at least no one else has noticed yet. Only Kaken. Because Kaken is like this, he's observant and amazing, if maybe harsh sometimes. Izuku decides that if things get worse, he'll tell someone. He's not sure who yet, but he doesn't think he can go on living like this if it doesn't start to get better soon. With a sigh, Izuku shuts his eyes tightly, pressing his forehead against the mirror. Quietly, in the deafening silence of the bathroom, he lets a tear roll down his. I hate you so much. Okay, Izuku might have been wrong, actually. He hates this more than having a headache, a concussion, and a little pain in his ribs than whatever is happening right now. He'd just been on his way to class. Mondays were always terrible, as were Tuesdays for not being even halfway done with the week, and Wednesdays because his mom always works longer shifts then, and every other day of the week, because they never seem to end. But this Monday in particular is starting quite terribly. One of the guys who had attacked him last week had cornered him at lunch. Had they attacked him? He remembers hearing something about killing. His heart is beating so fast it feels like it might jump out of his chest. Izuku puts a hand to cover it as though it might contain it. The boy, Haruto wasn't it? Shoves him against the wall, and Izuku is too stunned and panicking about the fact that, oh God, had they really tried to kill him? That he can only stand there helplessly. Somehow, the teen in front of him looks wrong, like he's the panicked one. You remember, don't you? Haruto says, holding Izuku against the wall with his forearm in the empty staircase. Why, what are you talking about? The green-haired boy asks shakily. He knows what this is about, but this is all he manages to get out. Maybe he can get out of this if he plays innocent. Don't mess with me. Well, not off to a great start. The boy's voice trembles as he speaks. At first, we thought you might have hit your head hard enough and forgot about everything, but I know better. Haruto is shaking, occasionally jolting Izuku in his hold. Izuku doesn't know what to do against someone who looks so distressed. Well, he never knows what to do against anyone, had stopped standing up for himself a while back. Getting pushed around had kind of become his whole thing. When Izuku doesn't reply, Haruto pushes him against the wall a bit harsher, knocking the breath out of him. Say something, he whisper shouts angrily with wide eyes, his voice cracking. I know you remember. I do, but it's still fuzzy, he tries to explain calmly. You can't tell anyone. Haruto urges, his hold on Izuku tightening and making him panic in return. Izuku reflectively grabs onto the arm keeping him there, but the other boy doesn't even seem to notice it. Not that anyone would believe you, you're so miserable. Best case scenario, they'd think you want attention because you're quirkless. It's nothing Izuku hasn't heard before, but it doesn't make it sting any less. Something makes him frown, though, because he knows that if Haruto truly believed that, then he wouldn't be here talking to Izuku and trying to convince him to keep his mouth shut. I wasn't going to, Izuku rasps out, tugging at the other's arm. Haruto stops pushing his weight against his lungs, making the freckled teen inhale suddenly. Something between a laugh and a scoff erupts from Haruto's throat. Well, if Midoriya says it, then it must be true, he mocks, running a hand down his face. You don't understand. If this gets out it could ruin my life. Izuku swallows. That's true. It could be pretty bad if people were to learn these students had attempted to murder him. But instead of panic seizing him, Izuku feels a rush of excitement run through him. Yes, it would be bad for Izuku if this got out, but for those guys too. It's the first time in his life that he feels this thrill of being somewhat in control. I know what you're thinking, Haruto smiles, and Izuku blinks back. You don't think I would just come here without anything to make sure you'd keep that yapping mouth of yours shut? He reaches into his pocket and pulls out his phone. There isn't anything keeping Izuku stuck against the wall anymore, but he doesn't dare move, a pit forming in his stomach. Hell is that? Static and wind make the audio shaky. There's the sound of fabric moving and quick, rattling breaths in the background. Dude, oh my God. Haruto turns his phone towards him, and Izuku squints trying to see something in the blurry video. He catches a glimpse of green hair, his pathetic self coming into view. Guy's a effing creep. Don't it's not yours. The video stops. I have the full thing, if you want to watch it some other time. Haruto taunts, stuffing the device back into his pockets. You want to be a hero, right? Not sure they would accept you anywhere after seeing this. You can't do that, Izuku blurts out, his eyes snapping up to meet the teen's, knowing full well it's not true. Hey, Haruto says gently in fake concern, placing his hand on Izuku's shoulder. It doesn't have to come to this, does it? You don't say anything and I won't ever have to use it. We both win, he smiles. Izuku is left stunned there, suddenly feeling nauseous. He's not sure if it's the concussion, his ribs, or just the fact that someone has a video of him like this. Maybe he's already shared it. The taller teen gives him a tap on his upper arm, much harsher than necessary, as though they were just good friends talking. He says, "Well, it was good talking to you, Midoriya. I'm glad we could come to an understanding." An understanding, my butt. Izuku hadn't even had a say in it. Never does. But what makes it worse is that he'd had hoped this time, had let himself think for a moment that he had something, only to have it be crushed right before his eyes. The moment Haruto leaves, Izuku lets himself slide down the wall, sitting down on the cold floor with his knees close to his chest. He doesn't eat lunch. He knows he'll just end up throwing it up, anyways. And yet, he still finds himself in the bathroom, pressed up on his knees in the farthest stall, dry heaving on his empty stomach. Izuku had managed to be late for pee. The silence is thick in the gymnasium, broken with Izuku opening the heavy door and letting them slam behind him as he approaches the group of students whispering amongst themselves. The teacher makes a snarky remark about his lateness but remains quiet when some even later students arrive. Because life doesn't seem to be rooting for Izuku ever, they're playing dodgeball. Izuku keeps his head low as two students are named captains and start picking students to be in their teams. Kaken is one of them, pointing at people and calling them extras. Eventually, Izuku is the last one remaining. Rock, paper, scissors, loser has to take him on his team. The other, captain, offers Kaken. The blonde just stares at the guy. "I'll take him," Kaken replies, glaring at the green-haired boy. The guy puts his hand up in front of him. "Your loss." Everyone on Kaken's team looks displeased to have him, giving him occasional side looks. Izuku swallows. This has never happened before. Usually, his childhood friend might have even thrown a fit if they happened to be on the same team. Izuku hangs back closer to the wall, not wanting to make himself an even easier target. Dodgeball with a possible concussion and very much likely broken ribs doesn't sound like his best idea. On the other side of the room, he makes eye contact with Haruto. The teen is talking with his friends, and he smiles at Izuku. "You're an idiot." Kaken. Izuku startles. The teen in question clicks his tongue in response. The teacher blows his deafening whistle, and about a dozen balls fly into the air, one of them barely missing by an inch. What kind of dumbass plays dodgeball with a FING concussion? The blonde says, grabbing the nearest ball and throwing it at the other team with a small explosion. Izuku grabs one that falls near his foot, huffing when he stands back up. Although Kaken makes a good point, he doesn't want this to be just another thing that makes his mother worry, another weakness he has to carry. "I told you I'm fine." A cyan ball stops right in front of his face as Kaken catches it in his hand, looking down at him with a raised eyebrow and throwing it back to the other team again. Izuku pushes his childhood friend's hand away and throws his own ball into the other court, more because he wants to get rid of it than actually hitting someone. "Why is Auntie even letting you come to school?" There's an unceasing static in his ears, but he hears Kaken perfectly. He grits his teeth, knowing that the answer is not the one the blonde wants to hear. He doesn't even know why he's so fixated on Izuku lately. But his lack of answer is one in itself. She doesn't know. There's something almost soft about the way Kaken speaks. If they were different people, it might have sounded like he cared. "It doesn't matter," Izuku says, stepping to the side to avoid a ball coming his way and wincing at the fast movement. He looks up and sees other people whispering on the other court, watching him and Kaken. He sees Haruto watching him from the distance. "Yeah, because you think you're so much better than everyone," the blonde spits, using another explosion to propel a ball to the other team, probably harder than he should. The accusation makes Izuku stop, though. Is this really what Kaken thinks? If anything, it's the opposite. That's not what he tries to defend himself, but the explosive teen turns to face him and cuts him off just as quickly. "You want to know the truth, Deku?" He seethes with rage, making Izuku take an involuntary step back. "You're just some lunatic who thinks he can be a hero and walk around all day with a FING concussion like he's some kind of invincible." Without warning, a ball collides against Izuku's side, knocking the breath out of him. It feels as though time slows, everything around him going silent and still, the world becoming no more than a background thought to the pain blooming in his side. Izuku folds himself in half, desperately trying to catch his breath, but there's not enough air. He can't breathe. He thinks he hears Kaken calling out his name, and catches him hovering over him from the corner of his eye. I can't breathe, he rasps out, falling into a spiral of hyperventilation. But it's not panic that's making it impossible to breathe, it's different this time, it's something with his lungs, an excruciating pain under his skin. He can't breathe. There's some shouting, and before he realizes it, Izuku has curled up into a ball, the floor cold against his cheek. He clutches his stomach as though it might help. That's how he dies, isn't it? Izuku can't breathe. He's really going to die like this. Bakugo Katsuki is so fing said. Anyone could see it. Anyone would say that's how he is all the time. But right now, he is absolutely seething with rage, and he doesn't get why, which is what's actually making him mad. Deku is grasping at his shirt on the ground, curled up like a caterpillar that's been poked with a stick. He keeps muttering and gasping for air, saying something about how he can't breathe. But Katsuki doesn't know what to do. He's not a pro yet, nor some shitty doctor. The teacher doesn't seem to have a clue what to do either, and all the extras just stand there, waiting for someone to do something. He'd call an ambulance, he yells, watching a few people stumble back and stare at each other. After coming out of their stupor, a few of them head for what he thinks might be their phones. He looks around and sees those extras who think he's their friend. They look shaken up like everyone else, but Katsuki's not blind. He can see them exchange glances, like holding back a laugh. The explosive blonde might be an a-hole. He might jump in when someone messes with Deku, but he can't stand it now for some shitty reason. Katsuki sees red. A little over a week ago, Katsuki's day had been going great. He'd gotten back his grade on an assignment, acing it like always. Deku wasn't discreet as he tried to peek at other people's copies, a frown on his face. Well, not like he cared what grade the sheet nerd got anyways. The teacher had announced that high school applications would be soon, and everyone looked at him because they knew he'd apply for UA, and that he'd get in. Even the extras hadn't bothered him today to ask about going to the arcade after school. So, yes, everything had been going well so far. Yet he felt he was missing something, but he couldn't pinpoint what it was. He figured that after blowing off some steam with his usual workout, it'd go away on its own. Then later the bell rang and he went home like always on his typical route, at his usual hour, with Deku trailing after him, like every other day. Halfway through he heard some noise, and the simple thought of Deku popping into his head filled him with rage. He turned around swiftly to yell at him, but there was only a bird picking at some seeds on the sidewalk. And no Deku in sight. But he didn't care what Deku did once school was over. He was just an inconvenience to be around, so really, it was a good thing that he wasn't there. So Katsuki turned back and didn't think any more of it. But the next day, when he arrived in class, Deku was still nowhere to be found. His quirkless but was never late. Hell, he was always the first. Sitting at his desk, scribbling into one of his weird notebooks. The extras that followed him around all the time were gathered up around a desk, whispering and snickering like a bunch of schoolgirls. Katsuki approached them with a scowl. "But Kugu, check this out." Finger Guy called out, holding out a worn notebook. Deku wasn't there, but his shitty notebook was. "How'd you get that?" He clicked his tongue, trying to get a closer look. "The guy probably dropped it or something, I don't know." The extra brushed Katsuki off, flipping through the pages of wobbly drawn heroes and messy notes. "Bakugo, you have to see this." And then he did. He saw a page of himself. Katsuki Bakugo, how dared he? Had the shitty nerd been stalking him? The blonde roughly grabbed a hold of the notebook, ready to send it up in flames. Quickly, his eyes scanned the thing. He looked for any hint and proof that Deku thought himself above Katsuki. Insults and false weaknesses, he didn't have any. But, staring a moment too long, all he could see were words like "amazing" written all over. "Man, it's like he's totally in love with you," the dumbest laughed, only to be interrupted by the bell. Katsuki kept the notebook, daring anyone to ask for it. Of course, there was an explanation as to why he didn't explode the thing into a million bits, as he had originally planned to do. And it was not because he cared about whatever Deku had written in it. There was something shady going on, and it only made him angrier not to know. Maybe keeping this shitty booklet would help or something. Katsuki didn't know. And of course, he still didn't know when Deku arrived 10 minutes late with his face all scratched up and a nasty bruise on his forehead. The teacher asked him about the homework due today, but Deku just stared blankly at the teacher like he didn't understand what the teacher was talking about. I lost it, Sensei. Deku acted all innocent, but Katsuki wasn't fooled by his excuses. He knew he was covering something up. His quirkless but didn't just lose homework, he'd always be the first one to turn in those shitty papers. The teacher just sighed. If that's the case, then I'm sure you won't have a problem telling the class how that might have happened? I don't remember. It might have been the pitiful way he said it or the slow blinks of red-rimmed eyes, or maybe it was everything about the green-haired boy from the way he stood to the confused look on his face, but Katsuki couldn't tell if Deku was lying. He knew he was telling the truth. It set him off just thinking about it. By the time the class was over, Katsuki had decided he was going to confront Deku. He roughly grabbed his things, shoving them back into his backpack. It was Deku's fault if he couldn't focus today. His fault that he'd been stuck with this crappy feeling in his stomach. But before he could even start making his way toward Deku, the teacher asked the boy in question to stay. Katsuki clenched his jaw. As he headed to the door, his eyes locked with Deku. He saw the boy frown slightly, but Katsuki could only stare, wondering why the hell he couldn't just shake this off. How annoying. Izuku doesn't understand what's happening. He'd been doing good so far, hadn't he? So why is he feeling this pain? What had he possibly done so wrong to deserve this? The world around him seems to collapse in on itself, becoming a mismatched bundle of colors, blurred together like paint on an artist's palette. Through it all, he sees a pair of fiery red eyes he would recognize anywhere. Izuku had never been very good at guessing what Kaken was thinking, and now is no exception. But Kaken is there, and Izuku knows Kaken. He has known him for as long as he can remember, and this alone is a thought for him to grab a hold of while the pain in his side keeps him from breathing. The cool floor under his knees is barely enough to keep him grounded. Izuku is drenched in sweat, hair strands sticking to his forehead as he steeps even lower to the ground, coughing up blood. It's disgusting. He's disgusting. He'll remember to think about all of this later, but for now, Izuku just wants it to stop. More blood pours down his throat, tickling down his chin and painting the concrete underneath a sickly shade of red. Katsuki hadn't meant to walk back to his house with the loser gang railing after him. In fact, what he'd actually meant to do was find Fanji Deku right after the final bell rang, and give him a piece of his mind about how annoying he'd been this week, but the nerd had sprinted out and screwed things up again. He grumbled internally as the extras talked and laughed about something he didn't get. Usually, Katsuki wouldn't care, and of course, now was no different, but there was something about their conversation that caught his attention. They kept talking about how they might have got in trouble but most likely not, how they should probably keep quiet, and how was a pathetic sight. It reminded him of how he'd sometimes talk about Deku. But Katsuki was the only one who messed with him, and the extras only ever followed. And he never hit the shitty loser or whatever, only yelled at him to try and knock some sense into his skull. The guy had to realize he couldn't be a hero, that he'd never be as good at Katsuki. Hey, isn't that Midoriya? One of the extras asked, tilting his chin to point at the streets up ahead. A blur of green hair entered a store up the small hill they were walking. The other guys just shrugged it off, not having noticed anything, but Katsuki's eyes were sharper. He stayed quiet, even as the group entered the convenience store, touching and grabbing things, putting them back in the wrong places but never buying anything. Man, I could have sworn I saw him come in here. Another shrugged. Doesn't matter, I guess. I don't think he even remembers. I don't remember. Deku's words echoed in his head, and the simple reminder of Deku's voice was infuriating. What the hell had those fuckers done? Remember what? Katsuki seethed, his voice like a sharp cutting right through the air, making everyone turn to look at him in surprise and a hint of concern. Even the sleep-deprived guy behind the counter looked up from his phone. Extra no. Who cares? Raised his hand in front of him, laughing his reaction off. Nothing, Bakugu, just some stupid inside joke. Yeah right, some inside joke. Katsuki wasn't an idiot. Anyone could have put two and two together and figured out they were hiding some shady. And he knew, too, that this said, shady crap, was also hiding from them. Katsuki didn't say any more, but his glare conveyed his message of, "F off right now or I'll kill you," well enough. When the morons finally left, Katsuki paced the rows quietly, glancing at each one until he reached the back wall. Deku was hunched on the floor, his ear pressed against the racks. He looked like sheet, his hair an even messier mess than usual, with his uniform stained with brown stains, almost like dirt. There were multiple boxes of crappy medicines stacked in his arms. He tried to find an insult or a jab to say to the teen, but for the first time in his life, his mind came up blank. "Deku," he said instead. The guy hit his head on the nearest shelf, making a couple of boxes of pills fall on top of him. Keikaken. There was this annoying nickname. Green eyes looked at Katsuki like a deer caught in headlights. "You look like sheet." He looked absolutely terrified. Katsuki didn't try to talk to Deku again after that. He didn't yell at him, didn't laugh when others would try to do something funny to Deku. The moron had made it clear that he didn't want Katsuki's help, so he could go find a FING place to die for all he cared. It wouldn't be his problem. If he thought he was doing so good, that he was so much better than everyone else, especially Katsuki, that he could just ignore a concussion, fine. So, he kept to himself. He observed instead of acting out, not because he didn't want to, but because he had no FNG clue what he would even do. The whole week, the shitty nerd kept excusing himself during classes and running off during breaks, then coming back looking even sicker. Katsuki caught him swallowing pills a couple of times, but he figured they were just regular painkillers or some sheet. Then the weekend came, and Katsuki still couldn't get the quirkless loser out of his DMN head. He ran so many FING laps in his neighborhood trying to blow off some steam that he eventually lost count. The thing was, he couldn't even tell why the F he felt like this. It wasn't worry, and it wasn't curiosity. So why couldn't he just ignore the whole Deku being weird stuff like he always had and move on? Katsuki wouldn't try to figure sheet out anymore. If the nerd thought himself too good to accept Katsuki's help, then so be it. It was Monday again, but things still hadn't gotten any better. If anything, the pit in Katsuki's stomach had just grown larger. He'd just been walking, heading to get ready for the physical education class. His hand was pressed against the staircase's door, but something made him freeze. "You can't do that," Deku's muffled voice came from the other side of the door, trembling slightly. Katsuki frowned, dropping his hand to his side. He should leave. He'd already decided that he wouldn't have anything to do with this anymore. And yet, he stayed and listened. "Hey," some random guy's voice replied, somewhat familiar. "It doesn't have to come to this, does it? You don't say anything and I won't ever have to use it. We both win." Deku didn't say anything after that. It made Katsuki wonder if he had got this wrong, and it hadn't really been Deku's voice. When the silence stretched on for long enough, he started walking away. "Well, it was good talking to you, Midoriya. I'm glad we could come to an understanding." An understanding? Katsuki turned around to see a guy, one of the extras that followed him around, exit the staircase. They made eye contact for a moment, and then Katsuki clicked his tongue and left. Izuku's vision is filled with dark spots around the corners, slowly creeping up to engulf him in complete darkness. Suddenly, he feels cold hands grab his arms from behind, trying to yank him up. He tries to pull away, muttering small no's whilst gasping and choking on his own blood. He manages to break free from one of the hands, wrapping it back around his stomach. It doesn't take long before the fingers are back, gripping his upper arm. "Don't touch me," he whimpers weakly. He doesn't know what's happening to him, and much less why. Faintly, he feels himself be lifted and placed back down on something soft. Izuku tries to escape, but the arms hold him down. "Let me go." His coughs worsen with each breath he takes. He continues trashing around while something or someone holds him down firmly, only making him panic even more as a fit of violent coughing racked through his body, making his voice crack. "Casey-chan, catch help me." His pleas fall on deaf ears. He tries to speak, but after a bit, the only thing coming out of his mouth are quick wheezes and more coughing. He hears some people shouting from every side, feels himself being moved again. The lights above him brighten tenfold, and suddenly Izuku doesn't have the strength to keep fighting. Something wraps around his face, covering his mouth and nose, and the cold breeze brushes against the exposed skin of his chest. His body jerks frantically when someone lightly touches the bruise on his ribs, but hands quickly hold him back down. Izuku pries at the mask on his face, but his body begins to weaken, the pain so loud and harrowing that he can't place his focus on anything else. His eyes flutter, and it feels as though the world, every voice, every sound, every beat, become nothing more than a distant thought, almost like being plunged underwater. The last thing he sees is Kaken's blurry form disappearing behind closed doors. At least, he thinks, he'll be dead before having the time to go mad. It cannot get any worse, any more painful, he had thought. Yet somehow it always does. Until there is nothing left to be felt. Until the end comes to take him far away from this place. And it might not be so terrible after all. Izuku-kun, what do you want to be when you grow up? Izuku has always dreamed of being a hero. During sleep or when he shut everything out. When his world was reduced to himself only. He had held on to this dream like a lifeline for as long as he can remember, recalls clutching his notebooks to his chest as he tried to muffle his sobs after particularly long days. And yet, as much as he has wanted to be a hero, when he gets stuck in this far corner of his mind, in this space where only he existed, where he is the sole inhabitant, he had never managed to save himself. Izuku! But life always finds a way to slip back in through the narrow cracks of the walls he'd confined himself within, following close until it catches up to him. Thinking about it now, it seems almost silly. What kind of hero would he even be? He's quirkless, for one. What would his costume be like? Would he even have power moves? Izuku can't even fight off teenage bullies, so how could he ever hope to win against anyone, much less a villain? It's more than that though. It's not just because he's quirkless or weak or any of that. It's him. He is Izuku, and Izuku is the problem. So when his mind does wander back to those places of his supposed hero carrier, you've got to Finji wake up, you're absolutely insane. He imagines nothing. Or well, all his mind ever supplies never has anything to do with heroes. He pictures himself in a small apartment at night by himself. He'll probably fall into the habit of smoking at some point if he lives for long enough. And drinking too if his luck turns out worse than he'd originally thought. There'd be traffic nearby, and there'd be a couple arguing every night one apartment over. His walls would be cracking, and he'd have a hard time saving up money to repair the sink that's been leaking for weeks. He'd have a mediocre job, and they'd probably let him have the worst shifts, because they'd know Izuku would never complain when this is the only place desperate enough to call him back for an interview. There's something strangely soothing about this, though. As if, for once, he could know exactly how things would play out, wouldn't need to be scared to take the next step forward into the void, because he knew what to expect. But that's not quite right. Because maybe the warm feeling in his chest has less to do with his imaginary dull adult life and more with the fact he doesn't think he'll ever get there. Izuku had never really been brave enough to face reality head-on. He's unresponsive. There is a bed on wheels, rolling down the halls of a very bright, very clean place. Few are those who linger in these corridors, but all of them without exception move to make way for the very pale, very sad-looking boy. It seems to go on forever, passing under those fluorescent lights. Emergencies happen all the time, especially in a society built on superpowers. But even after everything, it never gets easier. Doors burst open, as if the wind itself had gushed in to let weak child pass through. There's no pulse. The voices were quick and efficient, but their jaws were tight with anxiety. Get the defibrillator. A buzz in the air, static filling the room. The brushing of hands causes small shocks, but no one notices. The boy's chest is bare, exposed for the eyes of strangers to see. Later, it would be impossible for anyone to explain the look in their eyes, for there had been too much going on at the time, too much noise, too many bruises and too many hearts beating so loudly next to the quieter one. It might have been cold, those flimsy stickers they put on the boy's chest, but he does not feel it. His skin does not belong to him anymore. The miserable child does not react to the current heading straight for his heart. He's probably still in denial, Mrs. Midoriya. It's best to be gentle. He'll accept things as they are in due time. I suppose you're right. Izuku is, and perhaps has been for a long time, mad. He feels it in his head, how his skull is cracked and broken, any control he'd ever had slipping from him. Staying sane had never been much more than threading water. You're completely mad. His voice echoes all around him, but it's not mean or spiteful. It's just there, stating something inevitable, his fundamental truth. But it doesn't feel like death. And Izuku, so small, is sitting right there in the middle of nowhere. An empty galaxy above his head, his feet buried in the sand as soothing waves reach out to him, pulling and slipping away. It really is sick as though. Because Izuku had wanted to try for UA anyways. If he failed, then he'd finally have a reason to oi. And if he got in? Well, if he was accepted into UA, Izuku doesn't know what he would have done. Izuku, what do you want to be when you grow up? Why won't this voice go away? But the question would not stop echoing in the depth of this emptiness. What does it even mean, to grow up? Click, click, click. Izuku, what do you want to be when you grow up? Izuku knows he'll never get to grow up, not really. He'll never get old enough to break out of this childishness. So maybe, just maybe, because there is no point in anything, he can keep wanting to be a hero, because it's not like he'll actually have to choose what he could do with his life. Not when he knows it'll be over soon, somehow. I want to be a hero. A beat, silence. What is it you truly want right now, Izuku? What does he want? Doesn't Izuku want enough things already? Isn't wanting just another proof of his selfishness? There is no one but him in this place to judge him. Here, sitting between the depth of the sea and the glistening sand soft as silk under his hands, he breathes. Reality seems so far, now feeling more like a distant dream he'd once had, slowly fading away. And so, he lets himself be selfish, letting go of the guilt weighing on his heart. I want to stay here. Izuku lies down, letting himself rest as he stares at the pool of ink dripping above. The slow, crashing waves rise to his knees, his stomach, his lungs, then his heart, until Izuku is swallowed whole into his darkness. Katsuki is alone. As the ambulance drives off, sirens blaring, he wonders how many times something like this had happened before. How many times the world had been loud for the sake of Deku. How many times anyone had actually cared. How many times Katsuki had. And it's not that he does now. What he feels is not care, but an immeasurable anger that boils in his chest and bubbles up in his throat like a uncontrollable blaze. But Katsuki is alone, and he has been for a long time. It's not like he minds it, it's always better when people leave him the F alone anyways. He's going to be a hero, none of these extras at this school will matter in the end. He doesn't like people getting in his way, and that's the only thing Deku seems to be good at. The nerd is always where he shouldn't be, where Katsuki doesn't want him to be. Except for now. Izuku is not here, and still, Katsuki is not content. Katsuki is alone, a ringing in his ears echoing as Deku leaves his line of sight. But this quietness falls away as a heavy blanket is placed gently on his shoulders, a gentle but firm hand pulling him away. Katsuki's angry eyes snap up to look at the paramedic looking at him, speaking so softly he doesn't hear anything over the annoying static in his ears. And just as quickly as the sheet had been placed onto him, Katsuki yanks his arm back and pushes the woman away. Behind him, a noisy voice calls out, Bakugan needs his blanket to feel better after seeing some blood. Katsuki turns around to see the same guy that he had caught Deku talking to earlier. This irksome smirk plastered on the guy's face, as if he'd done something so incredible, and the laughs that follow is all it takes. It's that last drop of water that makes the vase overflow. It's the tick that makes a time bomb finally click. Katsuki snaps. Why do you always do this? Inexplicably, it's as though Izuku's mind pours right out of him, becoming one with the ocean dragging him down, 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 leaving him to drown in the emptiness of his self. Yet, for all the hurt he has felt, and all the hate and sorrow laced too tightly around his heart, and all the tears spilled, the hours spent just waiting, Izuku has never felt heavier. A strong wave passes him overhead. He thinks about his mom and everything she's done for him during her life. One time, he'd stumbled on old photos of her, when she was still a teenager. Her smile had looked so bright, laughter evident in her eyes. Thinking about it now, Izuku doesn't remember the last time he's seen her mother smile like this. You always ruin everything and no one needs you. And it's probably true. Izuku knows that if it weren't for him, his mother could have led a much better life and wouldn't have needed to carry the burden that is Izuku. He knows she would be able to smile like she used to if Izuku weren't there. Selfishly enough, though, Izuku would have liked to be there to see her smile again. There is a second wave, stronger this time, slowly making Izuku drift. The weight on his chest continues to push him down, and Izuku knows he is dying. There must be a word to describe how he feels right now, all alone in this serene apocalypse. Sadness doesn't quite cut it, because it's more than that, more than just tears and an ache. And it's not anger, because the ocean in which he floats and drowns has long since put out the fire in him. It's something much lonelier, much vaster. Like the dust that accumulates in the air after a wildfire, like the drops of water dripping from roofs after a storm. Desolation his mind provides. A state of complete emptiness or destruction. Yes, it feels fitting. There is nothing left to do but accept it. So Izuku finally lets go of the thread he'd been holding onto for so long, letting his slip from the tip of his fingers as another wave pushes right through him. Izuku gasps violently, doubling over with nothing to steady him, and suddenly he's not underwater anymore, but standing on the shore as he'd been earlier. He stumbles back from the glistening and unmoving surface of the ocean, no longer reaching for him. You're the one who did this to him, Katsuki says with blown-out eyes. His voice is strangely low, too steady in comparison to the wrath buzzing under his skin, making it itch. He feels a whole-body shiver of anger and blinding rage course through him, blurring his vision for a moment. The people gathered all around him stare as if he's the one who's sick. He can see the way some of them think it's almost funny, like it's him that's not in the right mind. The paramedic even has the audacity to try and offer him the stupid blanket again. Katsuki glares at the BSTRD with the ugly smirk. It's not my fault getting hit by my throw got him like this. I mean, yikes. The idiot laughs, other giggles erupting nearby. It's like no one else sees it. They had just left in an ambulance for F's sake. And they were laughing. They found it funny. But Katsuki knows none of them actually believe that it was the shitty dodgeball game that had put the quirkless sheet nerd like that, writhing on the floor and mumbling nonsense. It all happened so fast. 1 second, Katsuki is standing there, feet planted in place and unable to move them, and next thing he knows, he's walking up to the a-hole. The guy only has the time to take a step forward, thinking that Katsuki's all good, that he's on their side. And Katsuki punches him right in the side of his face, sending the extra flying on the ground with a shout of pain, and then the blonde is on him immediately before he has the time to recover, his vision closing in red around the edges, his face twisted in an expression of pure, unfiltered, and violent fury. Bullshit. Katsuki seethes with rage, clenching his fist tight because he knows he might just explode the coward's sorry excuse of a brain if his palms open for the briefest moment. That doesn't mean he won't disfigure the loser with his closed hands though. The guy clutches the place where he's been hit, cowering in fear, because that's what he is, isn't it? Just a pathetic coward. What the f are you? But Katsuki's fist connects with his face before he can finish his sentence. Punching him on his other cheek, for symmetry. You hurt him, you miserable moron. You're the reason why Deku's been in pain. He wants to say it, scream it, but his mouth refuses to. Some sick part of him is relieved, somewhat glad even, that he hadn't been the one to cross the line for once. He ignores the hands trying to grab his arms and stop his punches, getting hit once in the eye, enough to disorient him for a second. The BSTRD jumps at the opportunity to try and get on top of him. What an idiot, he should have run instead. Sending a kick to the moron's guts, Katsuki quickly takes the advantage again, punching him sloppily, probably harder than he should have, hearing an audible crack coming from his nose. He hears more than he sees the extras backing up in fear from the fight, the teacher calling out his name, but Katsuki doesn't FNG care. If anything, he's the one who's been tormenting Deku for years now, but at least he never sent him in a FING ambulance. Katsuki had always tried to help the nerd, tried to make him understand that he couldn't be a hero, it just wouldn't happen. But something about the determination in those viridian eyes, this look that would never be able to understand the concept of giving up. It sees Katsuki off. So he keeps punching the guy in front of him. No one FING gets it. Katsuki's nothing like them, nothing like the BSTRD crying under him. Katsuki's a goddamn hero. Katsuki's a hypocrite. But when has that stopped him before from doing whatever the FS he wants? Because the only thing on his mind right now, as he continues to punch the guy over and over again until his knuckles stain crimson red, is Izuku's annoying voice playing on loop, blocking out everything else. Casey-chan, catch help me. Katsuki's always hated the nerd's voice. Suddenly, arms are locking around his, ringing him back. He struggles, violently so, trying to get a few more punches into the ugly extra on the floor scrambling back. The guy clutches his face, blood trickling from under his hand, muffling his sobs. You think you're so tough, huh? Katsuki manages to shout, his throat feeling raw from his ragged breaths. His heart pumps in his chest at an impossible pace. Fucking, fight me you a-hole. Bakugu! You're effing insane, the B-dude cries, looking at Katsuki with a look of pure and utter fear. He wonders if that's how Deku had looked at him when he'd gotten hurt, never mind how that might have happened. Serves him right. Katsuki is pushed to the ground, with two sets of arms holding his hands behind his back in firm grips. He pants between ragged breaths, letting his face rest against the cool ground whilst the sound of loud and distant sirens gets closer. Despite himself, Katsuki smiles. In the end, he always wins. There's some kind of anxious, stickily feeling stuck on Katsuki's skin, making him want to snap at every bird singing their goddamn happy little music or to turn around to yell at every passerby looking at him for a second too long. When the gym teacher and the paramedic guy finally released him, the adrenaline had still been pumping through his veins enough that his head hadn't fully taken the time to process everything. But the day was already over by then, so they just sent him back home as though nothing had ever happened. He's a good kid, just a bit shaken. Yeah right, he'd show them if he's shaken, would bang their heads into the ground if they said some shit like that again. Katsuki kicks that same pebble he's been moving with his feet for the past 5 minutes. It's not that he cares about Deku, but this had just been too much. Katsuki wouldn't have done that, sending the loser to the hospital. Not in a million years. He's going to be a hero, he's not like those DMN extras. He kicks the small rock harder, hearing it clang against a metal pole in the distance, and starting to look for a new rock to send flying. It's not like it even matters, anyways. The quirkless nerd will probably be back in like a day or two at most. It couldn't have been that serious, the guy had always been a little weaker than everyone else, and they had just been playing dodgeball after all. Looking up, Katsuki hadn't realized he'd already made it to his house. And still, that sickly feeling remains wrapped around his skin. He blinks back, and then quickly scolds his expression back into a snarl. He opens the door and kicks his shoes in the entryway. He's too focused on the dried coat of blood on his knuckles, watching it crack as he clenches his fist, that he doesn't hear the woman speaking in the living room. I understand. No, I don't get why he'd do something like Upon seeing him, the hot-headed woman that is Mitsuki Bakugu snaps her fingers to get her son's attention. There he is now, I'll talk to him all right. And then she hangs up, cutting off whoever had been talking on the other end of the phone. Katsuki clicks his tongue and goes to head to his room. He doesn't want to deal with any of this bullshit right now. What is she even going to tell him, anyway? You idiot, what were you thinking? Katsuki Bakugu, you stop right there. The woman screeches. The school just called to tell me you've beat up a kid. Her voice gets higher and louder as she makes big gestures in the air to express her anger. What the F were you thinking? Well, he'd been close enough. He went looking to get punched. Katsuki barks back, small sparks popping from his palms. A pang of guilt shoots through his chest. He hadn't meant to come home and get into another fight, but he can never keep his cool when it comes to his mom. The front door opens, interrupting them both just as they went to jump at each other's throat. I'm home, Katsuki's father calls out, his happy mood very unwelcome in the very tense air that lingers in the house. The man seems to realize this too the moment he sees Katsuki and the old hag with murderous looks in their eyes. And maybe the bruise that's just beginning to bloom on Katsuki's cheek. The teen turns his head away with a small teeth. What's going on? Oh, I'll tell you what's going on. Katsuki got into a fight at school and some kid got sent to the FING hospital. Katsuki's eyes widen and his shoulders hunch in anger. That's not how it happened, you demon hag. He shouts. What did you just call me? Mitsuki, his father says calmly, placing a hand on the woman's shoulder, half to hold her back and half to soothe her. Then his father turns back to Katsuki, looking at him with a pitiful expression, like he's trying to comfort Katsuki, but that's not all there is to it. Staring at that old man's eyes a moment longer tells him that, while he's allowing Katsuki to explain himself, there's also a subtle hint of doubt too. What his parent thought hadn't seemed so important before. In fact, Katsuki had never cared about it. But he knows he's been a lot more snappy than usual these past few days, and his parents haven't been treating him any differently. But now, he knows they're beginning to doubt him, starting to think maybe he's the problem. And this is the last thread. So Katsuki, despite himself, swallows his rage back into his lungs with a shuddering breath. It's Deku that left in an ambulance. He manages to get out through gritted teeth. Katsuki doesn't quite understand why he suddenly feels so full at this simple statement. In a way, he feels lighter, like he's finally telling someone, even though his whole FNG class had been there to watch it happen. His mother seems taken aback by his shift of tone, enough to stay quiet for a moment and then furrow her brows. I who? Deku. Midoriya, Katsuki says, the name feeling weird in his mouth. Not like he was going to call him by his first name, though. Izuku? Inko's kid, the one you used to play with? The old hag questions, perking up in recognition and, perhaps, a bit of concern. Isn't he? Quirkless? Oh, that poor kid. Everyone had always felt so bad for Deku, but Katsuki never really understood why. Deku is doing just fine without a quirk. It's his annoying personality that's always been wrong. With him. That's not what. It doesn't FNG matter, okay? It's not, Katsuki says in a quick breath, running a hand through his hair, feeling the tangles where specks of blood had dried. He got sent to the hospital. Katsuki stares right at his mother's eyes, crimson meeting cinnabar. Some guy threw a ball at Deku and he FNG collapsed. Katsuki doesn't mention how Deku had been acting weird all week, how he'd been leaving more and more during classes to do who the hell knows what. Doesn't mention how he knows the pathetic extras that follow him around are probably to blame, and how this gut-sinking feeling won't just F off already. So who'd you punch then? His mother asks, crossing her arms and leaning against the back of the couch. She doesn't look completely convinced yet, but Katsuki has enough self-awareness to know he also doesn't look his best right now. The extra that did this ain't that obvious. His mother stands up from her spot and approaches him, her brittle composure shattering once more. For F's sake, Katsuki, how was that kid even supposed to know it would? He beat Deku up, okay? Katsuki snaps. I knew that and I didn't do shit. F-. What is this? It feels like a water dam broke, like everything that had been putting him on edge finally floods him. Katsuki stands and in a quiet, hoarse voice, he says, they all just stood there when they laughed. They FNG laughed. His mother stares at him for a long moment, seeing something Katsuki can't, and he hates it, he FNG. So don't ask me to apologize, 'cause that extra had it coming. A slap echoes in the heavy, suffocating room. Katsuki stares blankly at his mother, going to bark an insult at her, but then the next thing he knows, she's roughly pulling him into a hug, squeezing him hard. You d'med brat, she whispers, bringing her hand to the back of his head to ruffle his hair. Usually, Katsuki would have pulled away by now. In any other situation at any other time, he would have rather been anywhere than in his mother's arms. He can't move though. Everything is finally dawning on him, and he doesn't find the strength to try and wiggle away. Thus, he stands limp in his mother's firm embrace, the only thing grounding him, keeping his mind from swirling back to Deku's face asking him for help. After a few moments, his mother pulls stiffly, resting her hands on his shoulders. It's good to stand up for others, but it's best not to go around punching people too much. His father perks up, standing a few feet away from the two carbon copy time bombs. That's right, the old hag nods, giving him a harsh pat on his arm. So you better have punched him real good the first time. And at that, Katsuki smiles. Demon right I did. In the background, his old man sighs, using his palm to cover his face, thinking of ways he might be able to hide a body when his wife and son finally decide to commit an actual murder. The man had always been doomed. I should probably call Inko to see how she's doing, the blonde woman says, looking around to find where she'd last put her phone down. Masaru hands it to her, and she immediately goes to her contact list. We haven't talked to each other in so long, it's too bad this is what I'm calling for. Katsuki lingers nearby while his mother goes to stand behind one of the dinner table's chairs, turning her back to them. He makes himself a cup of water, letting the liquid barely graze his lips. He stares at nothing ahead, his attention completely devoted to the quiet ringing near his mother's ear. Hello. Inko. Mitsuki. It's been so long. Katsuki empties his still very full cup of water into the sink, finally letting himself let go of the breath he'd been holding. He doesn't know what he'd been expecting, honestly. The thing is, he'd probably been right, and Deku would be back sitting at his desk tomorrow first thing in the morning. It's good to hear your voice, too. You sound like you're all right, so I'll take that as a good sign. There's soft laughter on the other end of the line. What are you talking about? His mother hesitates, bringing her hand to rub the back of her head. I was calling about Izuku. Oh no, did he do something? Did something happen? I swear, there's always something. There's a small, awkward and tired giggle on the other end. Katsuki freezes in place, looking up at his mother, watching her seem just as confused as him. Wouldn't Deku's mom be the first one to know about this sheet? But maybe it's nothing. Actually, it's more likely that the hospital was just about to call, or something. Well, isn't he with you? At the hospital? A beat passes, no response. His mother frowns when it stretches on for longer than it should, pulling away from the phone just enough to check if the woman is still on the line. The hospital? Inko Midoriya has always been the first to worry about much of anything. When she was still in high school, her friends would tell her, more often than not, to relax, to take it easy. But that's not how things work. She can't simply swallow her anxiety back down, because the knot in her stomach is already terribly tangled. No matter what she does, it'll never get better. And so she continues to live one day at a time because there's not much else to do. Izuku is the only thing she has left in her life. Her husband is an ocean away, and the most she gets from him are occasional postcards with pre-written messages. The woman loves Izuku above everything else. Except, the more she cares about something or someone, the more she worries. And the thing about Izuku is that he's a human magnet for trouble. He has her biting her nails until her fingers bleed, staring at the clock when she finishes her shift before Izuku is home, having her heart beat out of her chest every time her phone rings, fearing that it might be something about him again. And that boy, he doesn't seem to have a care in the world for what people might think. Inko thinks it's admirable, or at least it would be, if it were anyone but her son, for whom she worries every day without pause. One of her few comforts is that, no matter what happens, Izuku is always all right. She's not blind, she knows he's struggling a fair deal, but even then he never gives up, and this, in turn, gives her strength too. Sometimes, it lets her take a step back enough to realize, maybe she does worry too much, and maybe she should give Izuku a bit more space. And other times, she's busy enough, in the middle of an appointment for a cat she doesn't know how to feel about, her mind elsewhere and wondering how she's going to break the news. So she doesn't give much thought to that missed call from a number she doesn't recognize and doesn't notice the message that's left on her voicemail. But then, she gets a call from a friend she hasn't talked to in ages, and it feels nice to just talk. But of course, that's not what it is it? Because Inko, as much as she wants to, can never get a break from worrying. The hospital? She thinks Mitsuki says something on the other end of the line, but Inko is already muttering a small goodbye and letting her phone drop in her lap. The train keeps moving, and the world doesn't stop for her, but she wishes it would. When the doors open to her usual stop, she stays seated, staring ahead, and ignoring the prying glances of strangers. She imagines her Izuku, sitting up in a hospital bed. Maybe he has some bandages wrapped around his head or his legs. Maybe his injury doesn't show at all. It's strange, because somehow, in this moment, Inko does not feel panicky. She has nowhere to run off to, can't rush anything while her heart beats a mile an hour in her chest. Instead, an eerie calm washes over her, as if nothing feels real anymore. Inko turns over her phone in her hands, her eyes falling on the notification of the voicemail she'd received earlier. She taps on her screen, lifting the device to her ear. "Hello, Mrs. Midoriya, this is Muzutafu's General Hospital calling. Izuku Midoriya arrived earlier in an ambulance. Unfortunately, we cannot disclose any more information over the phone." She presses end. Although she doesn't quite remember getting off the train and going right back into the place she works at, except for today had been different. She'd found a space for Izuku's cat and she eventually arrives. The moment she steps through the door, almost running into a man in a wheelchair, the gravity of the situation hits her like a slap in the face. Oh God, her Izuku is at the hospital. He's been here for who knows how long. The tired, anxious woman brings her trembling fingers to her lips, feeling all the blood drain from her face. One moment, it feels like everything around her is only an afterthought, a crushing silence filling her ears, and the next it comes crashing right back into her, the sound of people walking and talking loudly, of cars passing near. She rushes to the main desk, her hair still a total mess of frizz and tangled clumps. "Is Izuku there?" "I just got a call and yes, Izuku Midoriya," she all but frantically says, probably standing a bit too near to the plexiglass for comfort. The woman behind the counter hesitates, looking around. She'd only started working here less than 2 weeks ago, so it's only natural she'd be a bit anxious under the pressure, but Inko really couldn't deal with it right now. Inko lifts her hands in the air as if to make herself clearer. "Listen, just tell me his room number, I know how to get there." Still, the young lady purses her lips, a sad look on her face, but it only served to fuel Inko's frantic levels of distress. I'm sorry Midoriya-sen, I can't." "You can't what?" Inko slammed her hands on the counter, making a few irritated heads turn her way. She is so close to just going to get the files herself to know in which room her son is. "You called me, so let me see my Izuku." "Mrs. Midoriya?" Inko snaps her head towards the voice. A man in a black trench coat stands up from one of the waiting chairs, and a police officer on his right does the same just a moment later. The woman frowns. "Why would the police be here?" "My name is Naomasa Tsukachi. I work closely with the Child Protective Services. We would just have a few questions to ask you." He takes out his shiny officer badge as if she doesn't believe him. And maybe she hadn't. None of this seems real. It's too terrible. It's too much. Her heart can't take much more than this. She takes a step back involuntarily, stumbling slightly. No, what's going on? "Where's Izuku?" "I need to see him," she rasps out. "Of course, we just need to clear a few things up before we let you." The man says, like it's just a normal thing. "I don't understand," she whispers. Suddenly, all the peering gazes on her feel too much, parents bringing their crying children closer, the tense air and suffocating lack of it. "What's happening? Just tell me where Izuku is. We will fill you in on everything, but we believe you might be able to help us, or maybe enlighten us about the situation. But it would be better to go somewhere a bit more private." That Tsukachi man continues. It's infuriating, the way he talks but doesn't say anything. "I don't know what happened." "Just this way, Mrs. Midoriya." He cuts her off. And Inko, despite the grueling weight in her chest, has no choice but to follow. The ticking of the clock right above the door pierces through the silence draped over the space, now turned into a makeshift interrogation room. Tsukachi, if Inko had heard his name correctly, comes back with an extra chair, placing a total of 3 seats in a triangle. Inko's hands bead with sweat, wondering when she's going to be able to go see her Izuku. They'd said they were with child services, no? So if anything, the best thing for Izuku would be to see someone. Whatever this was, couldn't it have waited? She feels a buzz in her pocket, momentarily shifting her attention. She takes out her phone and sees a notification from Mitsuki. She's surprised in a way. After all, they hadn't texted each other in ages. It's a miracle both of them still had the same phone numbers. "Mitsuki, Keep us updated, and call me if you need anything. Inko places the device back inside her pocket. We don't want to keep you waiting for too long, Mrs. Midoriya, so let's begin, shall we? The detective slumps down in his wobbly plastic chair, putting one foot over his knee. He opens a file, reading it slowly as the silence stretches on painfully. Is he serious? First, he asks her to do some sort of weird interrogation thing, and then proceeds to just sit there? The green-haired woman is about to say something, anything if it can help her see Izuku faster, but the tired-looking man beats her to it. It must be hard having a quirkless child in this day and age, no? The question catches her off guard, and Inko is left with her lips slightly parted. What does this have to do with anything? She tries to understand how Izuku's lack of quirk could link back to her being here with 2 police officers. But her mind comes up blank. Sometimes it must even feel a bit frustrating, wouldn't you say? Inko frowns, her mouth now dry, and replies in a confused voice, "What are you saying?" Neither the quiet policeman nor the detective, had he even said he was a detective? Answer her. The former looks more bored than anything, she thinks, and his eyes glaze over the file in the hands of Tsukachi. You work as a nurse, is that correct? Tsukachi continues, ignoring her question and changing the subject. Yes, but I don't see how that's relevant to the night shifts too. He cuts her off. I understand what it's like. I often work at night as well. He tells her with a comforting smile like they were just good friends having small talk. It must be quite tiring. I'm guessing that means you don't always get to see your son after he gets home. He pauses as if in thought, and then he looks up, closing the file and leaning forward. Mrs. Midoriya, who cares for Izuku in your absence? There's no one else, she admits, casting her gaze to the floor, settling to observe the tiles there. But even then, I always have my phone nearby in case something happens. Like when the hospital called? The other police officer says, a hint of amusement in his voice. What is it with these men constantly interrupting her? I had an appointment, Inko answers, impatience growing in her chest. I haven't taken time off in months. This was an exception. Her eyes start to sting and blur in a familiar way, but with more anger than usual. She passes her thumb over her right eye as if it might do anything to help. Does he call you often then? Tsukachi asks, writing something down on a small yellowish notepad. No, she responds flatly. But he's quite the troublemaker, isn't he? Tsukachi insists, leaning in even closer while the other officer just sits back looking uncomfortable. His school report. His school does nothing to help him, Inko snaps, letting out a small disbelieving scoff. But the man doesn't lose a second. So he needs help, then, is what you're saying? What kind of help, Mrs. Midoriya? Physical? Academic? He pauses. Mental? He's twisting her words, making them come out as the opposite of what she'd meant. This isn't the first time someone has suggested Izuku might be mentally ill. Sometimes, most times, the only reason to explain it is his quirkless status, as if this in of itself was a mental illness. Right now, she would like nothing more than to tear that stupid paper from his hands and shove it in his face, demanding answers instead of sitting here and getting nowhere. You seem frustrated. The detective draws out after a minute has passed, observing her. Do you ever feel like taking this anger out on someone? On Izuku maybe? And Inko, for all the time she has been calm, each meeting at school where she has taken a deep breath for the 100th time, every moment where she has collected herself if only for the sake of Izuku finally feels something in her snap. The woman abruptly stands up from her chair, nearly making it tumble backwards. She points her finger directly at the tired man, although he looks unfazed, and the officer next to him suddenly straightens in his seat. Her voice comes out quiet but crystal clear to the ear. You are absolutely out of your goddamn mind if you think even for a second that I would ever lay a finger on my Izuku. It's hard, yes, but I would never blame my son for anything the world constantly puts him through. A tear rolls down her cheek, falling onto her extended hand. They think she's violent with him, but she won't give them anything to work with. She keeps her eyes on them with collected anger. The world can say what it will about her, but she will not stand and watch as they try to take her child away from her. We believe you, Mrs. Midoriya. This is just protocol. the so far silent officer steps in, glancing over to his colleague before looking back at her. "Protocol for what?" she hisses, her voice toned down to a raw whisper. The detective, Tsukachi, lets out a sigh and runs a hand down his face, finally breaking eye contact. He puts his small notepad back into his pocket and licks his lips, as if hesitating, before looking back at her. "You see, we had to make sure this wasn't a case of child abuse, and from what I can tell so far, I don't think this was you." "Child abuse?" Her face pales, and she unconsciously lifts her fingers to her chin. She had been aware the questions they'd been asking her had something to do with Izuku being in the hospital, but she hadn't really stopped to think about exactly why they would think this. Just what had happened to her Izuku. "You should probably sit back down. I'm sorry for what we're about to show you, but this is a possibly very serious case, and we'll need all the help we can get." He opens his folder again, taking out a small stack of what looks to be pictures. A strangled gasp escapes her lips, and already her eyes start to fill with water to the brim, but Inko can't make herself tear her gaze away. The first picture shows Izuku's chest, and then the next ones too, only from different angles. An angry, purplish bruise blooms on the side of his ribs, as if it had stretched into a flower-like shape. Inko takes the pictures in her hands, dropping back onto her chair. "When," she starts, lifting her green eyes to meet the detective's darker ones, as though she might find answers in them. "These were taken upon your son's arrival at the hospital, after he was stabilized." He explains. "But the injuries aren't exactly recent," he says, handing her more pictures. "They're estimated to be about a week old." This one of the side of his face, where a faded bruise shows. Another here, with his stomach painted black and blue. The detective crouches down in front of her, but she can't bring herself to look at him. They thought, oh God, they'd thought she had done this. This alone is enough to bring another wave of tears falling freely down her face, and she doesn't blink them away. "Do you know how this happened, Mrs. Midoriya?" Inko places the picture she'd been staring at under the pile, looking at the next one. A part of her doesn't recognize this as her Izuku, as though she's simply flipping through a stranger's medical file. "But that's not quite right, is it?" "A week, you said?" she mumbles. The officer hums. She stops again at the picture with the injury on his ribs. "The doctor said he broke a few ribs, and usually it's not too hard to deal with, just a lot of rest, and as little movement as possible." "But he didn't say anything," the woman says, a certain finality to her words. She knows everything the man is saying to her. She is a nurse, after all. But still, she doesn't interrupt him, even when she already has a good idea of what he's about to say. "He didn't," he echoes. "And sometimes ribs will heal on their own after a bit of time, but in this case," he sighs and waves his hands. "The bone broke inward, and it punctured his lungs severely enough that he, well, ended up here." Inko purses her lips. She scrutinizes her head for a sign that Izuku had been hurt, that he had been in pain. But with every flash of memory, all she can muster is how he'd looked fine. And then she remembers that one morning when Izuku hadn't woken up on time. She'd smiled fondly at how peaceful he had looked asleep, and then how she had called out to him quietly. And then a bit louder, no response. And then she'd shaken him, and he hadn't woken up until the panic had risen in her chest. "There's something else, though, isn't there?" she questions. The detective seems to consider her for a moment, and then he stands back up and walks back to his chair. The man nods, sitting down, and taps a finger at the back of his head. They think he hit his head pretty hard, caused a concussion. He sighs, clasping his hands together. Then, Inko bursts into the room, stumbling and startling the nurse inside as she does. She thinks the woman says something to her, but she pays it no mind. The two officers had been following after her when she'd gotten up and asked for his room number until they gave it to her, and the next thing she knows, she is left alone in the room with Izuku. He seems so calm, so still. There's an IV planted in his arm, water mixed with some other medication dripping steadily. His chest is exposed, and seeing all the bruises now in the bright light makes it all seem too real. Izuku had insisted on dimming the lights lately, so she hadn't gotten the chance to get a good look at him. She hadn't thought much of it at the time, thinking he only wanted to have a more relaxed atmosphere. The woman doesn't understand how he'd managed to hide it from her, Or more so, why he had kept it from her. Hadn't she always cared for him? What was he scared of in coming to her? How did I miss it? She whispers, sitting on the chair beside his bed. They think he hit his head pretty hard, and it caused a concussion. Some bleeding in the brain. Inko brings her hand to brush a strand of hair away from Izuku's face, her fingers grazing the scratches from the kitten, still scabbing. Suddenly, she thinks about last night. She'd been on the phone, trying to get an appointment for that cat Izuku found, and then she'd offered to take some time off of work, just this once, because she had thought it might make Izuku happy. She wonders if she had brought Izuku with her then, if it would have made any difference. If it would have made her notice it, whatever it might have been he'd hid. Or if she had scheduled the appointment for another day, and had already been at work, here at the hospital, when he'd arrived in the ambulance. This is her fault in a way. No, it is her fault. If not her, then who was supposed to notice it? She's not blind. She knows Izuku doesn't have a ton of friends, and that his teachers aren't very honest people. But she hadn't thought it had gotten this bad. She would not have thought, would not have believed that if things came to this, her Izuku would hide it from her. Where had her sweet little boy gone to? Inko takes her son's hand in hers, softly running her thumb over the back of his hand. I really failed you, haven't I? He's stable now, but a lot of things went wrong. The bleeding in his head, his punctured lung, and his cardiac arrest. It's kind of an incredible thing that it all happened when it did, or else things might have ended differently. Her bottom lip quivers, and her shoulders start to shake soon after. The corners of her eyes are red and raw from rubbing there so many times already. A cool gush of air bites at her legs from the air traps on the floor, and she brings her knees closer together. Right after his reanimation, he fell into a coma. She lets her head fall over her crossed arms on the bed, still holding her child's hand tightly, sobs racking through her body. Izuku is the only thing Inko truly has in her life. He's her purpose, the reason why she works so hard, why she still cooks nice meals, why she still does the laundry. If it were just her, she wouldn't have any reason to do these things. She'd have nothing. Leave it to her to handle anything, the hardest challenges life could throw at one. But not this. Anything but this. She would not survive losing her Izuku. A loud clang erupts from the floor, making her jump. Inko turns her head to see her phone on the floor, fallen face down. She sniffles, and then reluctantly lets go of Izuku's hand to pick the device up. It's gotten dark outside, and at some point, someone must have come in to dim the lights in the room without her noticing. The bright light from her phone makes her squint, and she quickly goes to the settings to tone it down. After her eyes have adjusted, she notices the notification from earlier, still there, left unopened. For some unexplainable reason, she stares at it, much longer than she knows is normal. Mitsuki, keep us updated, and call me if you need anything. Inko slumps in her seat, letting her forehead rest against the back of her hand. She presses Mitsuki's contact and lets her thumb hover over the call button. It's not like she's going to answer, anyway. In the end, she doesn't know why she presses her finger on the screen. She doesn't even know what to say, and she doesn't need anything. Or at least, nothing her old friend could give her. The ringing of her phone echoes in the hospital room along with the soft bips of the heart monitor. Katsuki lies on his bed, his eyes transfixed on the ceiling. He should have been asleep by now, but his eyelids couldn't manage to stay close. Downstairs, the television still plays some random show his parents are watching. His hair hasn't completely dried from the shower he'd taken earlier, and there's still some blood on his skin he hasn't been able to clean. Deku's shitty notebook lies right next to him on his bedside table, very out of place in Katsuki's room. Suddenly, a phone starts ringing downstairs, and the TV abruptly stops. Katsuki sits up in his bed, straining his ear and waiting, telling himself it's probably nothing. Yeah, just like brushing things off as probably nothing did a lot of good lately. Inko, hi. How's? He hears his mother says, and then curiosity gets the best of him. Yes, he's just curious, all right? There's some effed up part of him that wants to know what's going on, even if it's just Deku. So he steps out of his room, making his moment as quiet as possible to try and hear the conversation, going down the stairs and stopping right before the living room. The old hag's ruby irises are fixed in his direction, but it's like she's looking right through him, her vision distant. It's so weird to see her like this, all worried and sheet. Plus, it's not like she and Auntie Inko were close anymore. Hell, he can barely remember the last time he'd seen Deku's mom. One moment, it's like she's in a trance, like she's not even on the phone, and instead just frozen there. And then she blinks and runs a hand through her hair, turning around on her heels and heading for the door. Oh my god, Inko, I'll be there in a bit, okay? The blonde woman scrambles to take her coat, holding her phone to her ear with her shoulder while she places a bag under her other arm. Oi, what's going on? Katsuki hisses, finally giving up on trying to hear the conversation through the phone. Not the time, brat. His mother waves him off, barely sparing him a glance. Katsuki hates this. The hag wouldn't even know what's going on, wouldn't even have called Inko if it weren't for him, and now she's just keeping sheet from him? What's wrong with Deku? He asks, harsher this time. The woman mutters something to the phone he can't make out, reaching with her free hand to take her car keys. Katsuki clenches his fist and then goes to grab his coat. I'm coming with. His mother slaps his hand away, putting her phone in the crook of her neck and finally answering him. No, you're not. She whisper shouts, her voice agitated and coming out uneven. You're going to stay here and get back to bed, and I'll call you when I can, you got that? She stares at him with a long, harsh look, silence stretching between them. Katsuki hadn't realized he'd been holding his breath until he lets out a small tsh, tearing his eyes away. Just moments later, his mother is out the door, the headlights of her car lighting up and disappearing out of view. There's nothing left for Katsuki to do, no one left to punch, no one else to argue with and yell at. His father doesn't try talking to him as the teen walks back up to his room with a scowl. The anger seeps out of him, leaving him to deal with a restlessness he can't manage to shake off. Katsuki ends up reading for the rest of the night. Izuku had been walking. He'd been walking, the sun had been perfectly high, and the sky completely cleared and tainted such a heavenly blue. Out of nowhere, All Might had come up to him, and they'd been talking about heroes since then. All Might seemed to be exactly on the same level as him, talking about the most recent heroes' news, and even answering some of Izuku's questions. You'll make a fine hero, Midoriya-kun. His idol says, holding up his signature thumbs up and blinding smile. You really think so, All Might? Izuku asks, feeling his face flush at the praise. Before All Might answers, a soft thump echoes from the alley they had just walked by. Scrunching his brows, Izuku walks towards it and finds a small kitten cowering inside a wet cardboard box. All Might, I found, he starts saying, but when he turns around, the bustling city that had existed there moments ago has all but vanished, and All Might with it. Izuku purses his lips, debating between running after his idol or helping the small cat. But the soft meow that escapes the creature makes him turn his gaze back down. I'd missed you too, Ruby, he smiles. The cat jumps from the box, right into Izuku's chest. The boy attempts to catch it in his hands, but the moment the kitten makes contact with him, it simply dissolves into a red, bright, crimson liquid. A startled gasp escapes his lips as more blood starts to flow out of his chest, giving no sign of stopping. Izuku's heart picks up, horror curling his stomach uncomfortably as he is drenched in his cat's blood. Izuku scrambles backwards, trying to get out of the alley and back into the sun. Shaky breaths come out of his mouth, his hands trembling, but he can't get a word out, nor a cry for help. Suddenly his hand slips on the red liquid, and he falls backwards, hitting his head against the concrete under him. And then he blinks, and the sky is empty. Gone is the powdery blue he'd seen before. The teen rolls over, panting and coughing out more clumps of blood. He tries to clean the crimson substance from his face with the side of his palm, but it only makes it worse. He's yanked up on his knees by a hand pulling at his hair, and it's then he notices he's not alone anymore. Countless nameless faces surround him, laughing and whispering. He can't make out what they're saying, but Izuku knows it can't be anything good. This situation feels all too familiar, but he has no desire to get hurt like he did before. He does not think, he simply reaches out to grab the hands holding his head in an attempt to pry them off of him. Fighting would be pointless, so maybe he can try to make a run for it. but the hands refuse to do so much as budge. Izuku is completely and utterly helpless. Why is All Might never there when he needs him the most? Aren't heroes supposed to save people? Then he blinks and suddenly the hand is gone, vanished out of existence as do the crowd of sneering teenagers. In front of him stands Haruto. You remember, don't you? The teen says, more so stating the fact than asking an actual question. The green-haired boy jerks back in surprise, but his back collides with a wall. He shakes his head. I didn't tell anyone, I swear. He tries to explain, not a stutter to be heard in his voice, but Haruto is staring down at him with an unreadable expression. You ruined my life, Midoriya, he says as the sky darkens, a red drop falling from the sky right onto his nose. Then another. If you just kept quiet, everything would still be fine. The teen backs away with a flicker of horror in his eyes. Izuku is frozen there, unable to do anything. Why would you do this to me? Haruto is drenched with blood, clutching his hair in despair. Izuku hadn't meant for this to happen, hadn't wanted for it all to have come to this. I didn't mean to. Izuku cries, the words dying from his lips as he stumbles to a stand. Does it even matter what he intended? He can do nothing as he watches one of his tormentors slowly die away, terror and hatred contorted in the other's expression. You're like a plague. Haruto croaks, coughing up blood. Unwanted. Sick. He walks on wobbly feet as though he were drunk until he's only a few centimeters away from Izuku's face. He raises a finger and jabs it right in Izuku's chest, his dark irises staring intently, as though his gaze alone could swallow the quirkless teen whole. You kill everything you touch. Listen, Katsuki. There'd been some shuffling on the other end of the line, Mitsuki sighing as she searched for her words. The doctors, they can't tell when Izuku's gonna wake up. It's bullshit. Katsuki, this is serious. His mother had replied with an edge to her words. It's less about when Izuku recovers and more about. Her breath hitched, and for a moment the line went silent. It's bullshit. No one knows what the F they're talking about, no one knows shit. Deku's been annoyingly following him his whole Demon life, sticking to him wherever he went like some meager bug. And they think that's it, that Deku's done? They're all idiots. And even if he does, they're not sure how he'll react, Mitsuki added. Silence stretched on for a bit, maybe uncomfortable, but Katsuki couldn't have cared less. I know he was your friend, she'd said after a while, with some sort of gentleness in her voice. Or pity. He's not. Katsuki had hung up. Replaying the conversation in his head now ignites an overwhelming rage inside Katsuki's head, like dropping a match to a forest that's been rained on with oil. It doesn't matter how much time has passed, or how many calls his mom had with Auntie Inko. Katsuki's FNG mad. Furious. Ireful. A deafening explosion sparks from his palms and collides against hard metal. The blonde pants as he tries to catch his breath, only taking a moment to steady his stance before he starts running again. Sweat tickles down his forehead, some drops getting stuck on his eyelashes. Katsuki slides a hand down his face, swallowing dryly. As he continues running through the staged city, he can't find any more of the shitty robots. He'd never used his quirk so much before, but he feels so angry at everything, it's like his heart could burst right out of his chest if he doesn't set fire to everything within reach first. It feels wrong. Everything feels wrong. Shut up, he mumbles under his breath. It had been a sunny day so far, just perfect weather. Now a cloud looms overhead, and Katsuki, if he hates rain, despises how it sticks to his skin when it mixes with the nitroglycerin in his sweat. Katsuki turns around to glare at the thing blocking the sun, and his shoulders sag as his eyebrows draw closer together in confusion. Effing hell. A giant robot straight out of a science fiction movie just appears out of nowhere, coming right his way, though not as fast as the smaller robots, which have all been reduced to piles of junk by now. There's no way he's dealing with this sheet. It feels like there are thousands of needles planted in his arms, and his ears are buzzing from having set too many explosions. But then something catches his attention, right in the corner of his eye. Someone is pinned under a pile of rubble directly in the path of the giant but robot. Someone curled up on the ground, probably in pain and exhausted. Katsuki grits his teeth. Casey-chan, catch help me. Shut up. Shut up. The doctors, they can't tell when Izuku's gonna wake up. When will everyone learn to just shut up? Katsuki feels heat rise in his chest, anger spiking again until his vision goes red. Turning around and heading straight for the gigantic piece of metal, he yells at the top of his lungs. I'll if he kill you, Deku. Die! He aims both his palms at the bottom of the robot's foot to make it lose its balance, making sure the girl stuck under the rubble is out of the way. It all happens too fast. The sweat in his hand ignites, sending a jolt of pain in his arms, all the way to his shoulders, his neck, his chest, and then he's sent flying back from the force of his explosion. The ringing in his ears worsens tenfold, and the back of his head hurts like hell. Katsuki can barely feel his arms. Izuku watches as Haruto melts right before his eyes, leaving a pool of blood under the spot where he once stood. The freckled teen's heart catches in his throat, and he stays as close as he can to the wall behind him, going around the puddle in slow, trembling steps. There's nowhere to run to. The alley goes on infinitely with no end in sight, nowhere to go, no way to escape. He rounds a corner and halts suddenly, watching the small form of his mother sitting on a chair at the kitchen counter inside their apartment. Her shoulders shake as she muffles her sobs, sniffling. She doesn't notice him staring from behind, and suddenly he's a child again. Oh Izuku, why couldn't you have been normal? Her voice breaks, and then her head falls back into her arms. No, his mother wouldn't have said that. Did she? Of course she did, he just heard her say it. Izuku takes a step back, heading for the front door. He yanks it open, almost tripping on his feet as he steps outside with a strangled gasp. Izuku walks inside his classroom. It's empty, save for the teacher sitting at his desk. The man doesn't spare him a glance, and the boy shuffles quietly to his place where a single piece of paper is set. This is an exam, he needs to pass this. It's important, more important than anything else right now. Izuku starts writing down his answers as quickly as possible, and it doesn't take long to finish. His chair scratches loudly against the floor, making him wince. Izuku makes his way to his teacher and places his copy down in front of him, cold sweat trickling down his neck. The man lazily glances up, and then slides the paper closer to himself. He takes one long look at it and writes something illegible in bright red ink in the top corner. You fail, his teacher announces boredly as he stares at Izuku with his eyes half-lidded. But you didn't even look at it, Izuku insists. There was no need, you always fail. He hands the boy his paper back. There's a heaviness to this paper that hadn't been there before. All his efforts, his hard work, his dreams, his hopes, condensed into one single sheet of paper. All worthless. I don't understand. I did everything I was supposed to, the boy mumbles. His emerald eyes becoming glassy. Midoriya. It doesn't matter how hard you try, you know it'll never be enough. The fan is whirling in the classroom, and the wind brushes against the windows. His teacher rests his chin on his clasped hands. His eyes bore into the boy's emerald ones, and he says with a tone of finality, "You are not enough." The ink on the exam copy bleeds into the paper, consuming it whole and leaving Izuku's hand red and empty. When he looks up, he's in the middle of streets, void of civilians. Every electronic billboard screens are black, and the sky is gray and empty. There is not a sound, not a bird singing nor a bug buzzing, to be heard. I don't like this, Izuku whispers in a broken voice, crouching down in the middle of the streets where multiple roads meet. He places his hands over his ears, squeezing his eyes shut. Please, make it stop. Upon entering the classroom, everyone quiets as Katsuki makes his way to his desk, glaring and daring anyone to do so much as even look his way. In the far corner of the room, a group of extras are gathered around the BSDRD's desk. The guy, Haruto something, does make eye contact with him. There are bandages wrapped around his face, and his lip is split where Katsuki had punched him. Someone whispers something to his ugly face, and suddenly he looks away. The teacher stands up from his place awkwardly, propping a pile of papers on the surface of his desk and clearing his throat. If anyone still hasn't returned their high school application choices yet, you still have until the end of the week to bring it to me, he says, straightening up. Someone raises their hands. Yes. What if they're absent? Some random girl asks. Katsuki can practically feel it, the way everyone glances over to Deku's vacant desk. Absent. The man at the front of the classroom coughs whilst taking a sip of his coffee. Well, there are some unique cases, but unfortunately, there's not much we can do about those. Yeah, right, like it's some kind of well-kept secret that Deku hasn't always wanted to go to UA, like the teacher himself hasn't said it in front of everyone once. It's all complete bullshit. Why do you care? Deku's voice echoes in his voice. Katsuki clenches his fists tightly, breaking the pencil he'd been holding with a crack. Why won't Deku just FNG wake up already? Izuku rubs at his eyes, but for some reason he does not cry. The wind picks up all around him, ruffling the leaves of nearby trees, but he still does not feel cold. A static noise echoes above him, multiplying in number and loudness by the second. Izuku looks up and watches as every electronic billboard slowly comes back to life, random patterns of pixels displayed on the screens as though not receiving a transmission. It only lasts a few moments, and then the static is replaced by an actual video, popping on every single screen with only a few milliseconds of delay on certain ones. He's worthless, CRZZH. No, Izuku mumbles, his heart shattering into a million pieces. The trembling boy slowly rises to his feet, his head spinning. He takes a step forward, a hand clutching his heart. No, no, no. Look at him, another says. It's pathetic. CH won't even fight back. Deku. Izuku snaps his head towards the gruff voice behind him. Kaken is there, his back to him, staring up at all the screens and standing completely still. The green-haired boy feels dread creeping up his chest at the sight of his childhood friend. He stumbles on his steps as he makes his way to the blonde, grabbing onto his sleeves and pulling. No, no, Kaken, don't look, please, Izuku pleads quickly, a slight quiver in his voice. Kaken, you can't be a hero like this, Kaken says, and although Izuku keeps tugging at his sleeves, then his arms and his shoulders, he can't make the blonde budge from his spot, can't make him look away from the screens that are everywhere. No, Kaken, Izuku cries. This is an empty world. There's no All Might, there never was. All Might never saved him. No, the closest thing he has ever had to a hero in his life is Kaken. Kaken's always been amazing, and he always told Izuku that he couldn't be a hero, not without a quirk. Izuku can't let him be right, or else everything will be over. If Kaken leaves now, it's all going to have been for nothing. Izuku-kun, what do you want to be when you grow up? I kept telling you, now look what happened, Kaken says, his voice eerily soft and calm. Izuku purses his lips, those ruby irises boring deep into his very soul. There is something so very wrong. Izuku pulls away suddenly, as though his hands had been burned. You're not Kaken. Kaken wouldn't, he would yell at me. Something to be remembered. Does it matter? Not, Kaken replies, smiling in a way that feels wrong, the crinkle around his eyes softening. His pupils aren't the red Izuku knows. It's different. It's not the angry, ruby-red color Izuku is used to seeing. It's red as in blood oozing out of a fresh wound, lifeless. See, guys, a effing creep. Izuku blinks back tears, and he comes face to face with a perfect copy of himself, except he's not hurt and bleeding, but he doesn't look angry, just tired. He's the Izuku on the other side of the mirror. You're mad, Izuku, he breathes out. You need to hurry up and wake up already. Wounds to be reopened. It's not that Katsuki has never seen Deku outside of school, of course not. They're childhood friends, they've been stuck to each other since forever. But for some reason, anxiety prickles at his skin at the idea of seeing the guy for the first time since that day. Mitsuki's heels clang on the hospital floor, walking side by side with the smaller carbon copy of herself. You show some respect when we get there, you hear me, brat? She says, trying to hold up her firm and serious attitude, but it's not hard to see she's shaken. Even after all the time she came here, even just to see Inko, she can't seem to get used to it. Katsuki clicks his tongue. Whatever. Inko is there, sitting outside a room and looking at her phone. His mom walks up to her and then they start talking in hushed voices. Katsuki waits there until eventually Inko tells him he can go inside with a strained smile. And only because he doesn't have anything better to do, he does. There's this thing though about being told something, having it be described to you, and then actually seeing it for yourself. Deku is lying in a hospital bed in a shitty pain room, with some dying sunflowers on the bedside table. He's plugged to a dozen different machines and tubes, things Katsuki doesn't know much about, and much less about what they do. And in the middle of it all, Deku sleeps without a care for anyone in the world. He looks terrible. He looks peaceful. Katsuki doesn't know what prompts him to talk. The words are out of his mouth before he even comprehends them. "You can't be a hero like this," he mutters, staring at his childhood friend's listless form. There's a sort of lightness in the air about knowing Deku can't hear him. Thinking about it now, there's so much he'd want to tell Deku. Katsuki wants to scream and tell him how much of a goddamn idiot he is for not having said anything sooner, tell him how much Auntie is suffering right now because of his stupid butt. He wants to tell him how he effed up that random guy's face, and how he destroyed everyone at the UA entrance exam. Katsuki clenches his fists, a constant ache present in his palms. Quietly, he sits down on the chair next to the bed. Just hurry up and wake up already. There's that annoying static at the back of his mind again, or maybe it's something in the room, one of the numerous machines that Deku's hooked up on. But this alone, any little thing at all, is enough to make him snap. It's been like that for a while now. Someone during dinner tapping their nails on the table a little too long, an extra in class raising their hand to ask a stupid question, some stranger walking in front of him in the slowest possible way. Katsuki lifts his head to glare at the machines, and the static increases in his head. He goes to yell and lash out at something, anything, the first thing he'll see. And then he realizes that it's not in his head, this increasing static that is less of a crackle and more of a constant beeping sound. The heart monitor next to Deku's form picks up pace, slowly at first, just enough so that Katsuki doesn't notice it, but then it quickens. Katsuki doesn't know what to make of it right away, whether it's good or bad news. Katsuki sees a red button next to Deku's head and clicks it without thinking too much. A cold sweat washes over him, and he runs a hand through his hair, about to go ask his mom and auntie if this sheet is normal. His breath catches in his throat, all air leaving his lungs. Deku's eyes flutter just slightly, a twitch, so small a breeze could have done it. And then, an eye cracks open, just enough to give way to a hint of emerald, closing just as quickly as it had opened. A nurse rushes inside, Inko and Mitsuki following closely behind, but Katsuki holds his arm up to stop them from coming any closer. His eyes do not leave Deku's face for even a second as the quirkless teen's eyelids continue to flicker, opening unhurriedly and blinking heavily at the ceiling. It's like he's not fully there. Like he's still asleep and seeing something they can't. Katsuki should say something, try to get his attention, maybe to prove that he's not just hallucinating things, but any words he might have uttered fall dead on his tongue. The pillow holding Deku's head shifts, and the freckled boy whose face looks sickly pale now turns to look at Katsuki. His cheeks have sunken in a bit, and although Katsuki knows he has freckles, he's not sure he would have known they were there if he didn't know the guy so well. Their eyes meet, and Deku just stares without saying a single word. Katsuki barely recognizes him. Distantly, he hears the nurse call out to someone out the door as Inko approaches the railing of the bed. The thought crosses him that if Deku were dead, he wouldn't look so different than now. A heaviness that hadn't been there before settles inside Izuku. It reaches his limbs, his chest, and his eyes. The ceiling is white and bright, not so unlike the sky that had been there moments ago. There's a fan above him that whirls and turns, producing a cool breeze that grazes Izuku's cheeks. The sensation feels weird, almost foreign. He lets his head fall to the side and he sees Kaken. Is it really Kaken this time, though? Or not Kaken? Crimson eyes look down at him, unmoving and frozen. Izuku tries to raise his hand to wave it in front of his childhood friend's face, just to see if this is real or simply another trick that's being played on him, but his arm only twitches instead. But the red is ruby red, and those irises aren't dull like not Kaken's. They have a shine to them and maybe something else, but there's no way to tell what it might be. Ah, but Kaken had seen him, in that video, hadn't he? He'd been there just moments ago. Maybe there never was a fake Kaken. Izuku can't stand to look at those eyes any longer. Suddenly, tears well up in his eyes at the memory. Izuku feels an immeasurable guilt flood his heart and embarrassment chokes his lungs. Kaken, he slurs, unsure what to say next. And after a bit, sorry? The blonde's eyebrows scrunch up in surprise before contorting into something more like frustration or anger. Oi, what the hell are you on about? From the corner of his eye, Izuku notices his mother enter his vision and approach Katsuki's side. She looks at him with those big round eyes as though stunned. They don't know what Izuku's done, they don't know how terrible he is. A sob escapes Izuku's lips, and he finally manages to lift his arm that's tangled in so many strings and wires, dropping his wrist on top of his eyes to hide. What are they doing here, watching as Izuku cries whilst lying in bed somewhere he doesn't recognize? If they knew, they wouldn't be here. I'm horrible, he croaks, his mouth impossibly dry. Inko crouches down next to his bed, reaching to grab her son's hand. She splutters, Izuku baby what's? I ruin everything. Izuku cries. For the longest time, there has been a bird inside Izuku's ribcage, fluttering its wings aimlessly and trying to find a way out, until finally, it bursts, blood splattered inside his chest, tainting his heart and feathers sticking to his lungs and choking him. It should be a relief, but it feels like something breaks within him. But Izuku has always been broken from the start, and removing this wrongness does not solve anything. Where does that leave me? He wonders. He lets his hand fall to his chest, clutching at the fabric there. I killed everything. There is nothing louder than his weeping in the terribly quiet room, even as Izuku tries to swallow back his tears in vain. Deku, your dumbest didn't kill you. Kaken is suddenly cut off, a woman that looks an awful lot like him smacking his. No, I did. Izuku shakes his head, trying to sit up and failing. You saw it, Kaken, all of it? The hell, he hears Kaken mutter. And then there's only his mother in front of him, still crouched on her heels. Her eyes are all red and puffy all around the edges, but it does nothing to hide how tired she looks. Izuku, it was just a dream, his mother tells him, her voice ending in a high pitch. She scoots over closer to him, liking her lips and smiling through those sad eyes. You've been asleep for some time, but it's over now. A part of Izuku wants to deny it straight away because he had seen Haruto crumble right before him. He could still hear his voice, could still feel the blood drying on him like a second skin. Izuku had messed up somehow, and that's why Haruto leaked the video. There is no explanation. You're like a plague. But Izuku swallows the lump forming in his throat. It felt so real. I know, the green-haired woman breathes out, like she truly means it. Still, doubt lingers in the boy's chest, torn between wanting to believe it had all just been a bad dream and knowing that he's done something extremely, frightfully wrong. He does not know what to think anymore. His mind has long since turned against him. Yet, a question arises. His mouth is dehydrated, like he hasn't drank anything in a long time, and his body feels weak, or weaker anyways. Though his curiosity, or perhaps his dread, makes him speak up despite his state. How long? The hospital releases him 3 days later, after they've made sure everything was all right with him and that all he needs is rest. Rest? Izuku wants to laugh, and he almost had when the doctor told him so. Isn't this all he's been doing so far? Sleeping? And during all this time, the world had kept on turning, and everyone had gone about their day. For the most part, Izuku doesn't remember dreaming much. It had really felt just like being asleep. Even when they had told him everything that had happened, how his lung had been punctured, how he'd gotten a nearly fatal concussion and how his heart had ultimately stopped, Izuku couldn't feel anything. Once, he might have been horrified to hear all those things. But then he'd woken up, and things hadn't changed all that much except that he'd been able to avoid responsibility for 2 whole months and Izuku had not noticed any difference in not being there. Selfishly, he wishes he'd never woke up at all. On top of this, the only people that had been there when he'd finally cracked an eye open had been his mom, worried out of her mind, and Kaken, who had probably been dragged there by his mother. Izuku knows that had his childhood friend not been forced, Kaken would have never come to visit him. It's been around 8 weeks, his mother had told him with a slight tremble in her voice. And for all that had been left in Izuku, whatever threads still held together, whatever hopes had not shattered yet from the apocalypse his head lived in, completely burst. Then that means... Izuku had glanced at Kaken in the far corner of the room, whose eyes quickly tore away. He'd missed the entrance exam. Is all the blonde had said at the time. As Izuku trails after his mother, walking up the stairs to the apartment, a cold breeze ruffling his hair, the reality of the situation dawns on him. The thing is, to Izuku, it does not feel like he has missed 2 whole months. It's like he'd just gotten in the ambulance a few days ago, right after he'd woken up to see Kaken at his side. His mind wanders to his cat, how the last time he'd seen Ruby, she'd exploded in her hands as he tried to help her. He purses his lips, having to remind himself it wasn't real, and not fully believing it. They finally reach the final set of stairs and walk to the door. Izuku clears his throat, something between a cough and a swallow. By the way, how's Ruby? He asks half-mindedly. Recently, his mother has been so quiet, and so has he, but neither of them seem to know what to say, stuck between different realities 2 months apart. The woman's hands freeze where she'd been about to insert the key inside the lock, only for a moment hovering there, before sliding it in and making Izuku wonder if he's only imagined it. He blinks, brushing it off. He smiles tightly and tries to make awkward small talk. How'd the appointment go? Izuku. His mother struggles with their mediocre lock for a moment, squinting her eyes at the effort and then pulling it back after the door's been opened slightly. She huffs and then, without looking at him, says hesitantly, "Let's go inside?" There's this thing at the back of Izuku's head that makes him think there's no way something bad happened, because there's been so much, too much, going on, and he doesn't know how much more he can take. There has to be some kind of limit to how much misery can be thrown at someone, long past the point where they've already been broken. His hands grip the side of the door, slowly closing it. Shoes hit the floor where his mother takes off her own, without setting them up properly like he's used to seeing her do. She puts on the slippers that had been lying there in the entryway. "Mom?" His voice echoes without reply. His heart is eerily calm, as though it were holding a breath of its own. His mom stops at the counter, leaning towards it with her back turned to him. He follows after her and gently shakes her arm. "Mom, what's wrong? Where's Ruby?" "Izuku," she sighs gruelingly, running a hand down her face. "That day, when everything happened and before I even knew you were in the hospital, I went to the vet for your cat." She stumbles a bit on her words, reaching to sit on one of the stools. Ever since Izuku had woken up, everyone had been referring to the incident of falling into a coma as that day, no one daring to call it for what it actually was. Still, he gulps down his uneasiness, because he doesn't know what she's going to say yet, and lets her continue. "It's been some time now, but they said she was malnourished and you found her on the streets, so it's not." His mother does not lift her gaze to look at him as she speaks, but it does not mean Izuku doesn't notice it, how her shoulders hunch up defensively, and how her pupils are smaller than they should. They said it was probably leukemia, so they ran some tests and she did. The way she says it, it's almost a question. And how does he keep forgetting this part? This thing he keeps having to learn the hard way. Cannot get any worse, any more painful, he keeps thinking, despite being proven otherwise time after time. Even death will not be an escape for him. He had died, and then he still woke up. He cannot simply stay dead. No, somehow, for some loathsome reason, Izuku has to survive and watch as everything else around him is ruined and killed. "You kill everything you touch." "Couldn't they have done anything?" he whispers, absently bringing his hand up to his cheek. He can barely feel the scratch, the wound Ruby had given him when he'd found her, cowering in that alley. His mother opens her lips and closes them, her green finally eyes meeting his, and there he sees it, this guilt. The treatments, for that sort of thing. Chemotherapy for one, but they didn't know if it'd work, and even if it did, they only gave her a year at most. She swallows harshly, clasping her hands together. It was too expensive, Izuku, and we're already barely just making it each month. A choked sob escapes her, and her head drops, her forehead coming to rest on her closed hand. Izuku's mother had never audibly admitted to her struggles in front of him. She had always kept it together even though she'd always been terrible at hiding it. But this had been weighing on her, more than he'd realized until now. But this Izuku could not find it in him to move from his spot, to reach for her and take her in his arms for this, tell her that it's all right. Because every single string that seems to be keeping him standing is being cut one by the very people he is surrounded with, and this had been the last one. And now, Izuku is in free fall. She was the closest thing I had to a friend. He breathes out, and it feels so much more real, so much worse now that he's said it out loud. His eyes sting, but the tears won't come, so he stares at his hands, holding onto thin air. The woman looks up, her face scrunching up. She holds her hands out towards him, pointing towards him, his face, his arms. It kept hurting you, she responds, as though this explains killing it. It doesn't matter. That's not. Izuku's voice breaks as he tugs at his hair in frustration, his headache worsening again. It was in pain, Izuku. It was the best option. Yeah, well, I'm in pain too. Izuku lashes out, anger accumulated for years finally rushing out. He screams for all the times he had not been bold enough to. And I don't get to die. A laugh escapes him at the same time as a sob bubbles in his throat. Why is it okay for her to be free of pain and not me? Why does everything get to just die while I'm still stuck here? There's a word for how he feels, there must be. It feels like everything he had once been completely goes up in flame. It feels like falling. It feels like burning. Izuku pants, his hands trembling from rage and his heartbeat reverberating in his ears. His mother clasps a hand over her mouth, letting out a strangled gasp. Izuku, his mother whispers, like she's talking to a cornered animal. Her eyes are blown out wide, she is completely speechless. She starts to rise from her seat, but her legs give out under her and she falls to her knees, sobbing into her hand. He can't stay here. Izuku purses his lips, heading for the door and sloppily putting on his shoes. His mother keeps calling out to him, but he doesn't find it in himself to care. He truly is horrible. It only takes a few seconds. One moment he's closing the door behind him, not even sure if he's closed it all the way, and the next he's sprinting down the stairs, the cool air hitting his face. Izuku. A comet. That's the word he's been searching for. Izuku is a comet. His body is made of ice, stained with dust with time. In all his loneliness, he floats through the vastness and emptiness of space. And no matter how hard he tries, he will never find an orbit to settle and call home. He will never be able to come close enough to something lest he crashes into it and breaks himself in the process. So he runs with no destination in mind. His feet hit the ground loudly through the silence of the night. He passes houses and apartments, seeing people in the windows watching TV. He rushes under the leaves of trees that ruffle in the wind and jumps over the puddles of water from an earlier storm. His mouth feels dry already, but he keeps swallowing even though it hurts. His legs feel weak, but he keeps going without thinking too much because he's done that enough already, and the adrenaline is enough to keep him going. Izuku is completely empty. Midoriya. It doesn't matter how hard you try, you know it'll never be enough. You are not enough. Completely shattered. It's him. He is Izuku, and Izuku is the problem. Completely alone. Why do you care? I don't. And completely free. Thump thump thump. But even the smallest comets die. But they burn before they do, in all their glory, and people confuse them for something fascinating to watch when he's really just losing parts of himself little by little, until there is nothing left of him. Izuku rounds a corner to a street he doesn't pass often, following where his feet will lead him. Tears build in the corner of his eyes, and he brings a hand up to brush them away, but it only makes more fall, and soon his face is wet and he's sobbing uncontrollably. Comets are doomed to burn, but Izuku's always been an exception. He crashes instead. His steps slow on the middle of a bridge, and the freckled boy, in all his agony, his torment, his grief, falls to his knees where the moonlight floods the space. Izuku clutches the fabric of his shirt, trying to grab his heart to tear it out of his chest and make it hurt a little less. Alone, on a bridge he doesn't recognize, and in a weather that doesn't feel right, a lonely boy weeps. He puts a palm over his cheek where Ruby had scratched him and digs his finger right into it where he can feel the ghost of a scar. He carves it until he feels blood drip down his hands. If any curious eyes were to come outside on this bridge, in the middle of nowhere, they would find a child hunched over himself, bathed in a spotlight carefully crafted by the moon herself, with round tears rolling down his bloodied face as he weeps. But there is no one. He is no more than the shell of a person he used to be. He has no desire, no future, no aspiration nor goal, and no purpose. Izuku will not become a hero, because UA had been his only option, the only school that had gotten rid of that rule against quirkless people, and he had missed the entrance exam while he slept. It will never become anything of importance because he never has, so why would the future be any different? Without him, his mother would have a lot less to worry about, and now there is no more cat to go back to after a day's been hard. This, right now, the emptiness he feels, the heaviness of it all, this, is Izuku at his very core. When everything else is gone, the dreams, the hopes, the faith, is finally removed, this is what remains. It is not a weight that can be taken off. This is always there, lingering in his stomach without pause or relief. He is a sadness, and he will never be happy. Because he is Izuku, and when there is nothing left tying him down to this earth, he is not free. He is worthless. But he had known all of this, had expected it. He'd never thought he'd make it past this age, and the thought of going on like this is so much worse. Even after everything has burnt down and turned to ashes, somehow, it still hurts so much. There used to be a cat, loved and cared for by one, a boy whose soul shattered, but it lives no more. It's hard to say exactly when it started, or why. Izuku remembers when he was younger, looking at those tall skyscrapers, wondering if falling and hitting the concrete below would really hurt that much. Those hooks or poles that seemed so perfect to hang a rope, wondering how long it'd take until the air ran out. Those bridges, pondering on whether jumping or drowning would be scarier. At first, he'd pale at the simple train of thoughts, horror dawning on him as he looked away, wondering how he could even think about it. But with time, the surprise he'd feel at those ideas fainted away to leave place to normalcy, slowly turning into nothing more than a habit. Like a buzzing sound that's been there for so long, it goes unnoticed. And some days, when his eyes felt heavy peering up at those things, he thinks, what if, thinks, I could, thinks, maybe I will. It would be a soothing thought in those moments, for Izuku had been tired for the longest time, so exhausted. His heart had been worn down by accumulated dust from unuse, and sometimes he wondered if it still worked correctly. He knows it doesn't. But another part of Izuku was also angry, in a way that fire burns up everything that it is given, and does not let anything come close without turning it into ash. Those thoughts of death taken by his own hands felt like the only, no matter how scarce, control he still had over his life, and a thrill would rush through him, thinking how it would feel like for everyone else when the ghost of him would whisper in their ears and say, "Look what you did to me." Izuku has always been curious, so it's no surprise he'd wonder what falling would feel like. And he supposes he's just about to find out. Oh Izuku, why couldn't you have been normal? In the dead of the night, the loneliest boy on earth stands trembling on the ledge of a high bridge, his hands holding onto the pillar next to him tightly. He hadn't taken a good look at it when he'd arrived, his eyes still blurry with tears. It's one of those industrial-type bridges made of what he assumes must be metal, paint chipping off of it. There should be more people passing by, and at one time, there might have been. But not tonight, because this moment belongs to Izuku, and Izuku has only ever had himself. He takes in a shuddering breath, snot tickling down his nose uncomfortably as the tears rolling down his cheeks cool against the wind. He's really here. He hadn't expected it to be this high, to be quite honest. Except he can't be afraid of falling since it's exactly what he's here to do. His shoes are placed neatly on the ground just behind the ledge he's standing on, with his socks tucked inside of them, the laces undone. There is nothing else, though. Izuku doesn't have anything else to leave behind, he thinks grimly as he presses his lips into a tight line. There aren't any letters because he hadn't planned this, and deep down he knows he would never have been able to plan this without backing out last minute. But he doesn't have a paper to write now either. Even if he did, he's not sure what he would say. Maybe he'd apologize to his mom. For earlier, when he screamed at her, or for everything else before that, for wasting years of her life. It's all right though. He knows she'll understand, that after some time, she'll come around to realize this is a good thing for the both of them. The best thing. A full-body shiver racks through Izuku's body, his teeth clanking together harshly. He feels so cold without anything other than his t-shirt with "T-shirt" written on it, goosebumps raising on his arms and legs. Wait, maybe he should at least send her a text or something to his mom, to say he's sorry. Or something. No, he has to do it now or else he'll never do it. And he knows, from always having a little too much faith in the world, that things do not get better. For him, something always goes wrong and worse when he thought he'd already hit the bottom long ago. So, with a grueling effort, Izuku tears himself away from the pole on his right, freeing one hand while the other still clutches it despite the freezing metal. His palm is red and somewhat soft, but he can hardly feel it. The water under him is made of a million waves going in just as many directions, rushing and melting into each other to become one big pool of ink. But the moon is there to lighten it, showing a clear path to Izuku with her glistening reflection on the water, as though telling him she'd be there to catch him when he falls. And the thing is, no matter how many times he's tried to convince himself whatever he'd seen in his coma was nothing but dreams, he can still see the blood on his hands whenever he looks too long. Izuku still feels like a murderer, and he doesn't know if he can keep living with this weight on his chest. Wouldn't it only be fair for him to die? The metal in his palm is so cool it almost burns, and as he tries to readjust his stance on the railing, his foot almost slips, and he barely manages to catch himself in time, his heart jumping in his throat. This is what makes it feel real though. Suddenly, his lungs narrow and close in on themselves, making it almost impossible to breathe. But Izuku forces himself to take in a deep and haggard breath anyways. If he doesn't do it now, he'll never do it. Just do it, Izuku, he thinks. He hates himself more than he has ever loved anything else, as his breaths slow into a steadier beat, and the wind blowing becomes only a background noise as the world disappears and leaves place for Izuku, and only him. In this, he is showing himself kindness. For once, he does not tell himself to just ignore it, that he is pathetic for the tears that rush down his tears even now, in calm and gentle acceptance, and at last, he does not hate. No one needs you, he thinks, and for once, it is not meant as an insult, but as a truth that feels so very liberating. He will not be missed here, he can leave. Izuku lets himself think that it is true, he has suffered, and it is all right. He can rest now, he has had enough. You can give up now, he thinks, for the first and last time. He lifts a single finger, finding himself surprised at how lighter he feels already, like nothing matters. It's all right, it's all right, it's all right, the moon whispers. Then he lifts another from the hand that's still holding on, and another until there is only one. And suddenly he is pulled back violently from this lulling dream. Izuku falls, not towards the water, but away from it. His side hits the ground behind him, but something softens his falls before he rolls down with it. A cry escapes his lips, and he squeezes his eyes shut, as though he could avoid having to face reality as long as he doesn't look at it. But he hears panting above him, followed by a mumbled series of curses. Hands are pinning his arms to his sides, and Izuku cracks one eye open. He doesn't see much at first, his eyes still having to adjust to the darkness. But then colors start to take shape, and he sees faintly what must be pale blonde hair and dimmed red eyes. You're a goddamn idiot, Kaken tells him, swallowing harshly and continuing to pant. His childhood friend slumps down next to him, and when Izuku turns to look, he sees that the blonde has his wrist thrown over his forehead and his eyes squeezed shut. Neither of them talk for a moment, Kaken still catching his breath, and Izuku unsure if he should say anything at all. During this time, though, a lump forms in the freckled teen's. He is so pale his freckles barely even show anymore, throat, blocking something in his chest. Izuku turns his head up at the sky, his lips slightly parted, and stares at the moon, thinking about how he'd almost died. And how, despite having tried, he still hadn't. What the hell were you thinking? The blonde barks, his voice toned down to a hiss. He always seems quieter when it's just the two of them with no one else around. But similarly, Izuku always found himself losing control of his heart when it came to this boy. "Why did you stop me?" he whispers. He can't find the strength in himself to move, not after everything. He'd been right. If he did not jump when he had the chance, then he never would. And now he'd lost his chance. Kaken scoffs and sits up, dusting his pants. "You could thank me first." And at this, Izuku sits too, so fast that his head spins for a second. His eyebrows scrunch up and he stares in disbelief at the person, one he has known his whole life and yet can never seem to get close to, or get to know, or even hate or love. But then something breaks, as if he hadn't had enough of this already today. "Thank you." Izuku snaps. "Thank you. What's there to be grateful for?" His eyes start to well up with tears, and he wonders if they will freeze in his eyes like this from how cold it is outside. "Are you serious?" Kaken bites back, angry somehow, but he doesn't get to be angry, he doesn't understand anything. It's Izuku that has every reason to be mad. "I wanted this." Izuku stands and presses his hand against his chest to emphasize his point, and Kaken gets to his feet as feel only a moment later. "It's always like this with you, always what you want without giving a damn about anyone else," the blonde snarls, and then in a higher pitch imitates Izuku's voice. "I'm gonna be a hero because I want to. I'm going to hide my injuries because I don't care. I'll jump off a bridge because I don't feel like living anymore." "You don't get it." Izuku chokes back a sob, an angry tear rolling down his face. He crosses his arms, more to protect himself from the wind than anything else. "Please. Enlighten me then." Kaken mocks. "You've got everything." The green-haired boy's teeth clang together, and he spreads his arms widely before wrapping them back around him. "A nice quirk, a nice family, friends, good grades, and you're good at everything you do without even having to try." It feels strange to have this conversation now, because Izuku had imagined it happening at least 100 times before, thought of all the things he wanted to say to Kaken if only he had the courage and time. Never, in any of those scenarios, did he do it like this after having nearly killed himself. And in all of them, he retorted to what Kaken might say, but right now, the blonde just looks at him and lets him speak. So he does. He pours his heart out, from this crack on his chest, letting everything that's been held in for the longest time, finally spill. "People take one look at me and decide I'm not worth it. They either pity me and think death would be a kindness, or they hate me and want to kill me themselves." Izuku takes in a shuddering breath, crouching and staring down at the ground, burying his chin in his arms. "I'm really sick of that. All of it. The looks, the comments, the punches. Haven't I given enough?" Silence settles between them like a heavy blanket, weighing down on them. Izuku is so cold. He wonders if he'd be dead by now, had Kaken not been there. "So that's it then." His childhood friend huffs. "You just give up?" Despite himself, Izuku laughs. A giggle, half crazed and half simply exhausted. His shoulders shake a little, almost like he was sobbing instead. Yes, Kaken. I give up." He breathes out and then, "Isn't this what you've always wanted? I didn't want you to jump off a fing bridge. No, you said a roof, didn't you?" Izuku's voice comes out high-pitched, but he stares hard at Kaken, his heart racing inside his chest and in his ears. He makes quotation marks with his fingers. "Take a swan dive off the roof of the building and pray for a quirk in your next life. That's what you said, right?" Kaken gapes at him, and then his expression settles into a snarl. He waves a hand in front of him dismissively. "I didn't mean that." But Izuku simply scoffs in answer, shaking his head slightly and snuggling his chin back inside his arms as he shivers. "You're no better than any of them. You always pushed me away, you always said that I didn't belong and that I was. That I was weak and that I couldn't become a hero. Deku, listen for a minute, will you?" Kaken snaps, running a hand through his hair. He takes a step back, and Izuku tilts his head just a bit higher to look at him. "You're you're right, okay? I said all that shit and you know what? It's true. I'm an a-hole, so there you have it. I still think you're a FNG idiot. And I also don't think that you could become a hero. Did you stop me from jumping just to tell me that? I'm not done for just listen." Kaken huffs sharply, And then he sits down, legs crossed, right next to Izuku, not facing him. For a while, he doesn't say anything, but there's something about how the moonlight hits his face just right, how it makes him look so small in a way that Izuku has never seen before. And then he opens his mouth, closing it again before he finally speaks. I don't think it doesn't mean you can't become something else, something to do with heroes or some sheet. Kaken pauses, looking up to where Izuku had been standing on the ledge. But being a hero? You won't get anywhere with how society works if you don't have a quirk. And it SC case, and you're right about the fact I'll never understand you. But Kaken mumbles something the other boy doesn't manage to catch, pinching the bridge of his nose and turning his head away from Izuku slightly. Ugh, you're decent at other things. The smaller teen startles, frowning in confusion. Is Kaken trying to be nice to me? I'm not. Kaken yells at the accusation, twisting his neck to look in the other direction. I saw your shitty notebook after the extras stole it. Read it. Izuku feels his face heat up. You what? Let me finish. The blonde hisses, clenching his palms and gritting his teeth. When you were in that stupid coma, I went to the entrance exam and I talked to some people. He pauses. There are other courses, like business and sheet and support. I don't get it, Izuku admits quietly. He shuffles closer to the blonde, leaning forward to try and catch a glimpse of his face. Kaken, I missed the exam, there's nothing left here for me. Yeah, well, they liked your crappy notebook, Kaken grumbles, crossing his arms. What? Izuku jumps, grabbing the blonde's arms tightly. First, Kaken reads it, which is already embarrassing enough, and now more people, who? How the hell should I know? Kaken shoves him back and presses a piece of paper to his face. Find out for yourself. Izuku sits back down and looks down at the paper in his hand, noting how it's not actually a sheet of paper, but an envelope. He squints his eyes in the darkness, trying to discern the letter on the front. A soft gasp escapes his lips. Kaken, what? UA High School. Midoriya Izuku. Just open it already, Kaken urges, a hint of anxiety slipping into his tone. And Izuku does, tearing the flap of the envelope with his thumb messily, his hands and arms shaking, either from the cold or from the anxiety of not knowing what to expect at all. Distantly, he wonders if this is just a joke, if Kaken is looking at him right now while trying to repress a snicker. If tomorrow he'll have to go to school, and everyone will laugh at him for getting his hopes up. Dear Midoriya Izuku, thank you for submitting your application for our school through the recommendation system. After careful examination and consideration of your files and works, it is with great pleasure that we welcome you next year into the support course of UA High School. Support course. Izuku whispers under his breath, going over the letters to make sure that he's read everything correctly and that his eyes aren't simply playing tricks on him. For a moment, his mind is blank and he doesn't even bother to read the rest of the letter. His gaze is glued to the first small paragraph, and he asks in a small voice, "Is this a joke?" "You don't have to go if you don't want to," Kaken replies harshly. No, that's not it, The support course, but Izuku doesn't know how to explain it. There's this thing about really, really wanting something for a very long time, and knowing it's impossible to get it, which is heartbreaking. In this case, how Izuku had always wanted to be a hero despite being quirkless. Except, right now, even with the fact he can't become a hero, that he never could and never will, it kind of lifts a weight off his chest, pouring something forgotten and fresh inside his heart. Kaken clicks his tongue. It's not the hero course but... Thank you. Izuku cuts him off quickly. He tries to stifle a sob and fails dramatically. He presses the heel of his palm to his eyes, his shoulders shaking. He feels more than he sees Kaken standing there a bit awkwardly, not knowing what to do in this situation. Izuku wants to be held, but he would never ask this of his childhood friend. Not long after, he hears the blonde shuffle, and Izuku thinks he's about to leave and walk away. But a moment later, he feels a weight on his shoulders and back, the jacket. Come on, his childhood friend says, standing up. You won't save anyone if you die here because of a shitty cold. Despite everything, Izuku laughs between tears. Yeah. His childhood friend extends a hand in front of him, waiting. Izuku hesitates, staring up at the blonde and seeing those red eyes looking right back at him. He wonders if, perhaps, he's never woken up at all, and he's still dreaming. But as he reaches for Kaken's hand, he feels warmth, and still, the world holds on, doesn't collapse in on itself. And Izuku, if only this once, lets himself hope. Kaken is walking with him. Next to him. There's a distance being kept between them, an unspoken rule they've had since Izuku had been diagnosed quirkless. But still, it feels comforting somehow, like when the weather has been too hot for too long, and suddenly there's a gush of fresh air. So, they walk in the dead of the night, Izuku wearing Kaken's jacket, and Kaken wearing his worn-out skull t-shirt. Izuku had tried to offer the clothing back, but Kaken had glared at him so hard, he hadn't dared ask twice. One moment they're walking in the grass, on a path that's long since been overtaken by nature, then they are walking under street lamps next to houses whose televisions are all turned off, and now they are climbing up concrete stairs. A weight settles in Izuku's chest, one he had almost forgotten, because the earlier events. With his mother kept replaying in the back of his mind since they'd happened, and suddenly he wishes he'd been slower to get here. Yeah, well, I'm in pain too. His voice echoes in his head, making him grimace. Kaken must notice his hesitance as they come closer to reaching the door. His door? He always notices everything. The blonde clicks his tongue, looking back at Izuku as he's slowed down enough to fall back behind his childhood friend. There's one story left to go, the taller teen grumbles, and Izuku thinks he's going to say something else, but there's only silence. And still, he knows what Kaken means. Are you really going to give up now? Izuku shakes his head slightly and mumbles a small, yeah, swallowing thickly. There's only one story left, and that's exactly the problem, he thinks. But then he does climb it anyways, and when he looks ahead he notices how there's light coming out from under the door, even though Izuku's pretty sure it's way past midnight at this point. He stops right in front of it, pursing his lips and drawing his eyebrows together. When he looks to his left, Kaken is still there, staring back at him. The thin, tired boy glances back down at the doorknob and sighs. He reaches for it and opens the door gently, carefully. There is no greeting, no, "I'm home," from him, and no, "welcome home," from his mom. In their place, there are quiet voices and muffled sobs and sniffling, all broken by the sound of the door cracking and his feet stopping on the carpet. From here, Izuku can see the man who had come ask him questions the day after he'd woken up turn to look at him. Tsukachi, his mind provides. There's another police officer, but Izuku doesn't recognize him. And there, on the couch, his mother is there too with a handkerchief to her nose, her head snapping in his direction. She scrambles to a stand, muttering, "Izuku," in an uneven voice. She stops a few feet away from him, far enough that he couldn't reach her if he extended his arm, but close enough that he can see the red spots on her cheeks and near her eyes. No words are spoken, and try as he might, Izuku cannot manage to make the smallest sound. So he shuts his eyes close, and yet a tear still manages to escape him, rolling down his face and to his chin. His chest heaves as he lets out a quiet sob. His mother shifts in her place and then, before he knows it, her arms have wrapped around him in a warm embrace. "Oh, Izuku," she whispers, softer this time, and her voice cracks. "I was so scared, I didn't know where you were," and she tightens her hold and inhales sharply. Izuku is slightly taller than his mother, but in this moment, he feels so small, like a child all over again after waking up from a terrible dream. "I'm sorry, for not seeing it sooner, how much you were hurting," she adds, her tone high-pitched as if holding back her tears. "But I want to be better. I see it now, Izuku. I see you. I see you." Izuku cries onto his mother's shoulder, her vest quickly becoming wet, but he doesn't care, it doesn't matter now. He sinks his hands into the fabric of her shirt and lets himself be held. "So talk to me, okay?" she murmurs, her hand holding the back of his head and softly caressing his hair. And then Izuku thinks of how he'd almost jumped. He hadn't really realized it yet, it hadn't dawned on him how maybe, just maybe, his mother would care. How maybe this, her embrace, her words, were worth coming back at least for now. "Okay," he replies in the crook of her neck. They both sniffle, and then he reluctantly pulls back, just remembering that he is not a child, alone and safe in his mother's arms, but a teen, surrounded by other people. Akatsuki-kun. His mom wipes her eyes while keeping a hand on Izuku's arm. I hadn't seen you there. Kaken simply nods, his eyes downcast. Izuku sees in the corner of his eyes the two officers move up to a stand from their awkward positions in the living room. The green-haired teen swallows, hoping he's not about to be questioned again, though he wouldn't be surprised. He'd basically just run away, and his mother had apparently freaked out hard enough that she'd called the police. Midoriya-kun, we only want to help you. But we can't do that if you don't give us anything to work with, Tsukachi had said in the hospital room when they were alone, and he refused to answer their questions. Seeing his hesitation, the man continued to press. It might happen to other people if we don't stop the men. It won't. It was just me. Izuku had replied hastily. I don't want to press charges. I can't. They'd need evidence, he'd need to speak, he'd need to admit to being weak. He couldn't bear it, he would rather stay hidden in the back of his head, or under his covers with his cat waiting at home. Why not? Tsukachi had questioned with a frown on his face. It's useless, please. No one did this. Izuku sighed. No one. The detective almost scoffed. No one. Now, Tsukachi looks at him from across the room, his expression somewhat sad, or maybe just tired, and his eyebrow raised as if asking, still, no one to blame? And still, Izuku shakes his head, as though answering, still no one. He turns around as his mother's hand drifts from his arm. She walks over to Kaken, and it's only now that Izuku realizes how terrible they must look. Kaken's hair is slightly darker because of the rain, his cheeks are all red because of the cold, and dark circles are growing under his eyes. Izuku supposes he doesn't look so much better, he can feel his hair sticking to his forehead, probably a mix of sweat and rain, and after being hooked up to a machine for multiple weeks, he's lost a lot of weight despite not having much in the first place. He's lost most of the baby fat in his cheeks, and he would be glad if it weren't for the hollows that have settled there instead. His mother reaches his childhood friend and places her hands on both his forearms gently. If there had been a gush of wind, or any sound at all, he probably would not have heard her. Thank you for bringing my Izuku back, she whispers, and she takes Kaken in her arms, squeezing him tightly for a moment before pulling back. And Kaken looks stunned for a second, only blinking and nodding once. He clears his throat and looks away. I should get going. But, of course. His mother clasps her hands together. Tsukachi approaches them and puts on his hat. Since everything looks good here, we'll also be on our way, he says, and then turns to look at Kaken. Give you a ride home? I don't need one. The blonde grumbles. I don't feel so good about letting a child walk alone at this hour, the detective replies. Whatever. The first officer exits the door, but Tsukachi stops next to him and hands him a small business card. If you ever change your mind, he explains, and then he's out the door before Izuku has the time to say anything. He stares down at the piece of paper in his hand, knowing he'll never actually use it. He puts it in his pocket anyways. His childhood friend is just about to leave when Izuku remembers what he's wearing. Kaken, wait. Your jacket, he says, almost tripping on the doorstep whilst trying to remove the article of clothing. But Kaken raises a hand to stop him. It's fine, keep it. He grumbles. Izuku would like to protest, but Kaken's already done a lot for him today, so he decides he'll try again another day. Alright then, he utters. So Izuku is left to watch as Kaken turns his back to him, going down the stairs to follow after Tsukachi. After a bit, his mother ushers him back inside, and she makes them some warm tea even though it's terribly late. The both of them sit on the couch, splaying a fuzzy cover over their legs. And if they both fall asleep with tears running down their faces, no one ever speaks a word of it. It's hard. Izuku thinks it always will be, no matter how much he tries. A few days after the incident, they'd held a small funeral for his cat, Ruby. They, meaning his mother and him. It was sad and depressing, and they didn't have the animal's body to bury. He's never told anyone else about Ruby, he didn't see what good it would do. And a part of himself wanted to keep her memory all to himself, despite the short time they'd spent together. Today, Still, Izuku believes this cat has saved his life. It gave him hope when he was at his lowest, and he wonders if he might not have tried to take his life sooner if not for finding Ruby when he did. She had been like a butterfly, her life ephemeral, but capable of twisting fate. Still, every week Izuku goes to visit her, because if not him, then who? Maybe someday he'll be able to let it go and come back less often, but for now he simply places down the lily of the valleys in front of the grave. There's always this sort of peace that follows him after he's visited the cemetery. Early in the morning, more often than not on Tuesdays, when the city still sleeps soundly. Well, almost always. For some reason, Izuku's sweating more than usual today, even after going to see Ruby's grave, albeit a little later than he intended. Listen, there's no need to remind him he woke up late. Seeing Yue's gigantic gate come into view never stops to feel like a dream, something he might wake up from any moment now. He'd pictured it before, stepping into this school, going to class, wearing this famous uniform, but he'd always thought it would never be more than this. A passing thought. Yet here he is, Izuku Midoriya scanning his card to enter the building. There's always this moment of waiting, of expecting to be denied entrance suddenly that makes him hold his breath, but it always flashes green, and the gate lets him in. The boy closes his hands into fists, as though it might do anything to help how clammy they are today. Every now and then, he'll fall back into his old habits of nervousness and feeling like everyone hates him. Like everyone wants him dead. Come on, Izuku, positive thoughts. He almost snorts hearing that last part being said in Ground Dog's voice. He pushes the main door open and heads straight for the lab. There aren't many people at this hour. The hero students who are early risers usually prefer to go train outside while the weather is still nice. The people who linger in the corridor, Izuku tries to not look at. But sometimes he'll lift his gaze from the floor because he just has to know if people are staring, or if it's all in his head, those holes burning in his back. But, like always, most of them have their eyes glued to their phones. He does see a few students looking his way with frowns on their faces or bored expressions. Stop trying to determine what others are thinking, Ground Dog had said. It's good to think about other people and consider their feelings, but you don't have to bring yourself down doing it. Izuku swallows dryly, going for the stairs and taking them two at a time, even though his backpack is heavy and he's going to regret it later, and once he's reached the 5th floor, he makes a beeline for the lab. His footsteps slow and come to a stop a few feet away from the door, and Izuku waits and tries to listen for a sign that Hatsum is about to explode something. When he deems it safe enough, he opens the door and goes straight to his working station, still a mess from yesterday night's project he'd been working on. Setting his things on the desk, Izuku wipes the sweat on his forehead and blinks away the black dots forming in his vision. He'd forgotten to eat breakfast again. He reaches for the nearly empty water bottle on the table and slumps down on his stool while he drains the remaining water. Then he takes the half-eaten energy bar laying on his pile of work and starts picking up where he'd left off yesterday. After starting the support course, Izuku had found himself a new hobby? He wouldn't call it a passion, not after seeing Hatsum at work. But he likes it, how deep he can get into it and block everything out. It feels nice. Sometimes he thinks he doesn't deserve to be here. Izuku shakes his head and wraps Kaken's jacket around his waist. No, he thinks. Things are different now, he's at UA and everyone here is working hard to become all sorts of heroes, they've all been kind to him, or at least, not outright mean. So he perches down on the surface of the table to finish the blueprint of an improved version of someone's costume, Ochako Uraraka, a friend he'd made that's in his childhood friend's class. Subconsciously, his free hand reaches out for his water bottle, and when he brings it to his lips, he remembers he had emptied it earlier. Izuku finishes writing a little note for the design and then stands up from his place. Time is different when he works, and when he turns around, he notices that most of his classmates are here, also working on projects of their own. Izuku goes outside, making sure to keep his head low, but still waving back at Hatsum when she yells, "Good morning." She hands him her empty water bottle and asks him if he could fill it as well, not tearing her eyes away from the piece of metal thing she was currently mending, and he accepts, almost laughing at the thought that she is the most hardworking person here, but would rather die dehydrated than go get water herself. It's better when the corridors are empty and everyone is in the classrooms or outside in gyms. Izuku breathes out heavily as he fills his water bottle on the water fountain. See, everything's fine, he tells himself, thinking back to earlier this morning when he'd felt so anxious. Heading back into the class, or lab, no one has a set name for what it is, Izuku places Hatsume's bottle on her desk and makes his way back to his work. When he looks up around him, he sees people staring at him, not just one student, or two, but maybe half of them. They're giving him awkward glances with expressions he can't quite discern. What is it? Why are they all looking at him? Did he forget to turn in an important homework? Did he screw up one of his blueprints and everyone noticed and saw while he was gone? Do they hate him? Izuku sits back at his desk, putting his arm around his head, either to shield himself from the piercing glares on his back or to stop himself from looking at them. Maybe both. He tries to pick up his pencil and get back to work, but he doesn't know what to do. He reads and rereads his words over and over again, not understanding what they mean. His leg jumps up and down, and a cold sweat trickles down his neck. The green-haired boy lets his pencil drop and clatter against the wooden surface of his desk, and he reaches for his phone. Maybe he'll send a text to Kaken to update him about the gauntlet, not because he made any huge progress, but just to take his mind off things. The thing is, Kaken's already texted him. Izuku frowns at the message. Kaken, don't open your notifications. Izuku frowns at the message. He simply sends a question mark in reply. Kaken, just don't look at your phone till class is over, I'll come to your class. That's weird. Usually Kaken curses a lot more in his texts. But then he does notice he has more notifications than usual, and even to his number and his email. He should probably listen to Kaken, he's always right after all. And he's smart. But Izuku is curious, and he can feel everyone staring at him and he doesn't like it, doesn't like not knowing what everyone else knows. Izuku drops his water bottle on his desk, the cap still laying somewhere, and all the water falls onto his papers and blueprints, ruining his hard work, but he barely notices it. There's a video and he's been tagged at least 100 times on his socials, and notifications pop on top of one another of people replying and of it being reposted, and Izuku. He knows what this video is all too well. He's worthless. Why is this happening to him? Izuku has done everything right he shouldn't. Suddenly he can hear other people's phones playing the video too, and he wonders if he's just imagining it, or if it's real. It's pathetic. Look at him. Won't even fight back. Look at Hime. It's pathetic. Deku! Kaken's voice shouts, but Izuku can't find it in himself to tear his eyes away from the video playing on his phone, clutching the device between his hands as the room falls into hushed whispers. Deku, I told you not to. Izuku turns around, looking at everyone and seeing almost everyone looking back at him uncomfortably. Every sound is rendered to a loud buzzing in his ears. Izuku pushes past Kaken. When did he get so close? And heads for the door, his mind in a haze. He's barely out the door when Kaken catches up to him and grabs his wrist, but Izuku yanks his arm back. Don't touch me, he yells, breathing heavily. He wraps his arms around himself, searching for an exit, somewhere to go, but his mind is whirling, and he has no idea where he can go or why this is happening. He'd thought he'd left all of this behind him. Hey, it doesn't have to come to this, does it? You don't say anything and I won't ever have to use it. We both win. He said he wouldn't use it, Kaken. I don't understand. Izuku tries to explain, but he can't form a coherent sentence. He wants to cry and scream, but it's like he's frozen, and he can't do anything. He's completely useless. Come on, let's get you out of here. Kaken tells him, the bell's about to ring. And Izuku nods, following after the blonde hurriedly despite the fact he feels his feeble world shattering into a million shards of glass, piercing right through his skin. When the bell does ring, Izuku is sitting in the far corner of the cafeteria. Kaken's here, he thinks, but it doesn't matter. Izuku stares blankly ahead, but at some point, he takes his phone out, but the device is quickly yanked out of his grip by an angry blonde. Don't look at that, Kaken barks, almost angrily, and Izuku's eyes snap up in realization, his heart sinking to his stomach. You saw it, Izuku whispers. Of course Kaken saw it. Everyone did. He has this impression of déjà vu, as though this has happened before, But then he is reminded that it's not just his childhood friend, it's everyone watched it. Kaken sighs. Listen, we'll figure something out. The green-haired boy cuts him off. We won't do anything. There's nothing you can do. It's already out there. Izuku laughs, gritting his teeth and passing a hand through his hair. It's over for me, Kaken. I'm gonna be expelled. Some part of Izuku must have known, somehow, that he could not get his happy ending. Luck has never been on his side, and every day spent here felt like one too many, like he shouldn't have been there at all to begin with. Maybe this is how it was meant to happen. Tis, you're an idiot, Kaken says, slumping back into the bench. This is FINGUA, and you got in on recommendation. There's no way in hell they're getting rid of you because of something like that. Izuku scrunches his brows in frustration. Something like that? What's that even supposed to mean? It's stupid, that's what it means. Kaken replies, and Izuku shushes him quickly so as to not give their hiding spot away. The blonde scowls but continues in a whisper yell. You're the one who got into FINGUA while those extras are wasting away in some shitty high school, so yeah, it's FING stupid. That's not, Izuku starts to argue, but a chirpy voice coming from the intercom interrupts him. Midoriya Izuku from Class H1 is requested to the principal's office. Izuku lets his head slump and hit the table with a hard thump. This is it. Izuku is done here and forever. The dread in his heart is so heavy he feels anchored to his seat, like he'll never be able to move from this position ever again. Izuku twists in his chair, making the leathers squeak under him. He's been told to wait here, and Kaken to return to class, although the latter had initially been quite reluctant to do so. So now Izuku is left alone, waiting for Nizu to arrive. He'd forgotten to ask Kaken to give him his phone back. It's not that Izuku wants to see that video again, but it's like he needs to know what everyone is saying about him, needs. The door of the office opens behind him and with it the short rat dog bear, or whatever it is his quirk was, the principal enters. Midoriya, sorry for keeping you waiting. Man? Animal? Principal greets. The boy in question only nods, gulping as he straightens his posture. Principal Nizu goes behind his desk and sits in his chair, finally looking at the teen at eye level. As I'm sure you already know, an unfortunate video has been spreading around the UA campus. Nizu says, and although he speaks the words with a permanent smile on his face, his voice holds a serious tone. Izuku stares down at his hands. The UA campus, so it's not even just Kaken and the people in his year, it's the whole school, and soon it's bound to get out. Nizu clears his throat and leans on his arms. We have taken measures to control the damage, and we are working on deleting it everywhere we can. He explains. That being said, after discussing it with the staff here, we are afraid that. I know, Izuku interrupts. Gaze darting to meet the principal's eyes and then quickly looking away again. Nizu's face looks somewhat surprised, his ears raising on his head. He says. Well, I suppose it does make things easier. Izuku feels the familiar burning in his eyes rising, telling himself, don't cry, you saw this coming, and bringing his hand to rub his throat. It's just, I have all my things in the lab to the support course class, he says. I wouldn't be long, I swear, No, of course, we'll let you take what you need, Nizu reassures him. But I'm curious, Midoriya. What do you think is going to happen from here? There it is, Izuku thinks. There truly is no point in delaying the inevitable. Izuku had been doomed to fail since the very beginning. He exhales slowly and looks up to meet the principal's eyes. I'm being expelled, and I understand it's for, the best. And that the video isn't acceptable. So, Izuku rises from his chair and bows deeply. Thank you for having me. Silence, interrupted only by the sound of a drop dripping somewhere near the open window behind the small rat dog-like creature. Nizu hums. I see, is all he says for a moment, and Izuku has no idea what it means. He's not being dismissed, but he's not told to stay either. The principal really is weird. The quirked animal takes a sip of his tea, and the green-haired teen dares to lift his gaze once more. I suppose there has been a misunderstanding. Please, sit down, Nizu gestures him to the chair again and puts down his teacup. You are right in assuming that the video in itself is very unacceptable, but expulsing you is not the answer, no, he says. The reason I called you here is to ask what you know about this video. Izuku stares, the air stilling around him. He sits back down slowly. I'm not being expelled? Nizu smiles and shakes his head. No. This is good, it's good. Or at least, it should feel good, but there's still this knot in his chest that tightens when he is reminded that it doesn't matter if the video gets taken down because everyone has already seen it. Even Kaken. And they might not be expelling him, but they're still expecting him to answer their questions. To tell if he knew about this, if he knows who did this, who the people in the video are, when or why. You don't understand. If this gets out it could ruin my life. Haruto had said. Midoriya, I know this is a tough situation to be in, but keeping everything to yourself will not help anyone. The principal pushes. The boy in question purses his lips. It'll help me, he wants to say. Then, he won't have to carry the guilt of ruining someone's life if he just goes on like nothing's ever happened in the first place. But a softer, quieter voice inside of him speaks and wonders if anyone at all will carry even an ounce of guilt for what they did to him. I do not know who or what you are trying to protect, but I can assure you that it is not worth your suffering, Nizu tells him softly. I know. Izuku licks his lips, now terribly dry. He thinks of the video, but more than that he thinks of middle school and everything before that. How it's always been normal for people to pick on him. Those boys, they didn't know any better. They shouldn't have to suffer because of him. But I can't do it. The principal seems to think for a moment, and it's almost unnerving how Izuku has no idea what's going on inside his head. After a minute, the rat dog creature hums once more. You are a smart student, Midoriya. More than you give yourself credit for. Nizu tells him. Still, my doors will be open to you if you ever change your mind. Izuku's breath hitches and his eyes widen a fraction. He does not know what to reply, and even if he did, he doesn't think he could manage to get a single word out. So instead he nods and rises from his seat once more, bowing his head quickly. But just before he can open the door, the principal speaks up behind him. I will say this, though, not everyone is worth bleeding for. And it seems to me that you have bled quite a lot already. There is a beat, and then Izuku steps out of the office. He does not look back. Midoriya. Izuku covers his eyes with his hands as if it could help him hide from a very energetic and very loud Hatsum. He had thought he could come during lunch to pick up a few things so he could bring them home and work on them there. He had ruined that blueprint after all, and a little video like this wasn't going to stop him. No. But of course, this is the support course, and this place is never empty during lunch. Midoriya. Hatsum pops up behind him after. Ah, Hatsum, he fakes surprise, offering a smile as he continues to roll up his smudged papers. Putting his back to her and picking up a few of his tools, Izuku tries to look as busy as possible, hoping that Hatsum will leave him alone, but it does the complete opposite. He drops the pencil he'd been picking up, in turn dropping everything else he'd been gathering to the ground. The pink-haired teen rounds him and crouches down to help him. I was looking everywhere for you, she exclaims, putting down metal pieces on his desk with a clattering sound. Okay, everywhere in the lab, but you're usually pretty easy to find. I even asked that blonde guy, wasn't very helpful though, she mumbles. Kaken? Izuku questions. No idea. Oh, well I was just... The freckled teen hits his head on the corner of his desk while standing up, hissing sharply. I was looking for a hero student, for a support item, yes. Yes, I get it. She waves a hand dismissively in front of her face and sits down on his desk where Izuku had been reaching for a pile of paper. But I want to know what's actually going on, she says, staring at him hard, and then her expression shifts to one he rarely sees, one that is more serious. Doesn't it have something to do with that video going around? So you've seen it. He leans over his desk for a loose sheet of paper, but Hatsum is quicker at grabbing it and handing it to him. No way. I was too busy working on my new baby, she explains with sparkles in her eyes, but quickly collects herself and clears her throat. But you know, I've heard enough to know it's not great. Izuku sighs and runs a hand down his face. He finally turns to look at her. Listen, I know you want to help, but you don't need to worry. I'm fine. See, he says while smiling, which looks more like he's just showing his teeth, and opening his arms wide, a pencil clattering to the ground next to them. Hatsum pushes herself off the desk and puts her hands on his shoulders. Well, of course I'm going to worry. That's what friends are for, isn't it? She laughs gently. After a moment of just them standing there, with the room emptied of people, she asks, So, do you want to try that again? Lean on me, he reads in her eyes. Listen, we'll figure something out, Kaken had promised. So talk to me, okay? His mother had cried. That's right. Izuku isn't alone anymore. The principal had told him, not everyone is worth bleeding for, and Haruto certainly doesn't make an exception to that rule. To be honest, I'm not doing so well right now, Izuku admits in a shuddering breath, laughing awkwardly as he feels tears welling up in his eyes. One of Hatsum's robots rolls over, holding a box of tissues upside down. Izuku takes one gratefully and lets his tears fall freely and quietly as Hatsum does what he assumes is her attempt at giving a hug. It takes a day for the video to be wiped out from the surface of the internet. Completely. Izuku had tried to look for it. For some reason he can't, refuses to, explain. Some part of him still needed to see it. But it had been nowhere to be found. After this, Izuku had kept mostly to himself, walking quietly in the halls, and keeping his head low. Try to. Deku! An angry blonde yells. Much too early in the morning, way before any of the teachers even get to their classrooms. But Kogu! You can't just yell, another voice chirps in. Effing you watch me. Ah? Kaken, Uraraka. Izuku nearly trips on his feet, catching one of the papers from escaping his pile of research just before it falls. The two hero students stop in front of him, their postures stiff despite their expressions. The smaller boy's eyes widen slightly. If this is about the support items, I'm nearly done with them. I would just need to run a few tests to see if... Shut up, you know that's not why I'm here. Uraraka corrects. Kaken ignores her and shoots him a smug grin. Having told you your stupid face wasn't getting expelled. It's not exactly surprising that his friends, sometimes he can't believe he gets to say that, friends, are here for that, to ask him questions or check up on him. But the day is nearly over, only one PRD left to go, and Izuku doesn't really know what to tell them. Yeah, the principal was kind of nice, actually. So I guess it's all good now. Uraraka and Kaken exchange a look, which is odd, to see two of his friends with such conflicting personalities interact like this, because of him. But then again, he's friends with Kaken. Are you sure? The brunette asks. Izuku goes to reassure both of them, brushing them off so they wouldn't have him on their minds. But he knows that for people to worry about him is, in a way, showing that they care. And for a moment, he lets himself believe that they are genuine, and he does not want to ignore their feelings anymore. It's not perfect. Far from it. Izuku confesses, smiling sadly. It's still hard because I haven't really, taken the time to process everything. But it'll be fine eventually. Maybe it's because they hadn't expected him to say that, but there is no answer for a few seconds, as though they were replaying his words inside their heads with frowns on their faces. Uraraka takes a step forward and cups one of his hands with hers. You know, when I saw the video, I didn't understand what it was for the most part. It was blurry and shaky, so I didn't, she trails off. But, still, I think you're really brave, Deku-kun. Brave? Izuku startles, but the girl simply smiles. Well, I mean, you still put up a fight, you know? That's not how Izuku sees things exactly, nor how he remembers them playing out. If he's being honest, he doesn't think he was able to do much of anything at the time. But then again, who is he to correct her? Suddenly, she brings her hands together, her hair jumping at the movement. By the way, since it's Friday, everyone was thinking of going out after school, and we'd all be super happy if you came. She leans in and lowers her voice, lifting her hand to her face. I think even Bakugo will agree to join us if you're there. Shut up. Kaken retorts, small explosions forming in his palms. Yeah, sure. I just have something to take care of after school, but it shouldn't take too long. Izuku offers her a smile and she waves him goodbye, muttering about having forgotten to print out an assignment. Kaken lingers for a bit longer. Do. He starts, but quickly stops himself and grits his teeth. The blonde turns his head to the side. It's whatever, you know, if you're not, fine and sheet. The losers care about you. The corners of Izuku's lips turn up, and he huffs. I know, Kaken. When the day ends, Izuku gathers his things and puts everything on his desk back. In order. Almost everyone has left already, and the only person left with him is Hatsum, though she also is just about to head out. Hatsum stops in the doorframe. You coming? You go ahead without me. I need to take care of something, he tells her. She shrugs and loudly yells out goodbye from the hallway. And then, when Izuku is truly left alone, he sits back down on his stool, reaching into his pocket to take out a small piece of paper. Taking out his phone, he stares for a long moment at the card laying flat on the wooden surface. He doesn't know why he kept it all this time, why he didn't just throw it away immediately after he got it. Perhaps there was comfort in keeping it on him, like maybe he had known one day he would change his mind. He breathes in and exhales heavily, before dialing the number written on the paper. It's about time Izuku stops bleeding. Hello, Detective Tsukachi speaking, a tired voice answers. Hi, this is Midoriya? Izuku says, almost like a question, and waits for a sign that the man recognizes him. Yes, Midoriya. How are you? Fine, but The teen bites his lower lip, resting his forehead on his hand. I'm ready now. It's not. No one, anymore. A beat passes. There's some shuffling on the other end, but Izuku can barely hear it over the beating of his heart. All right, I'm listening. The detective replies. Let's start from the beginning. The wind blows softly around them, their footsteps crinkling the newly fallen snow under their shoes. Laughter fades out behind them as Izuku and his childhood friend walk side by side. He hasn't told anyone about his call with Tsukachi yet, but it doesn't feel like he needs to. Just being here with the knowledge he has people to lean on is enough to make his heart feel lighter than ever before. Annoying, Kaken mumbles under his breath, still hearing the group of hero students laughing in the distance. Izuku laughs easily, lifting his reddened fingers to his face to blow on them. Somehow, Kaken had been adopted by the students in his class, and they were all very much used to his brash personality at this point. He always acts like he's annoyed by them, calling them idiots, but Izuku can tell he cares for them. When they'd seen him hanging out with Kaken at the beginning of the year, Izuku had also been caught up in this friendship with them, even though they are not in the same class, nor the same program. They are all amazing, and Izuku always feels so grateful to be surrounded by those people. But still, it is moments like these that he prefers, when he is alone with Kaken, peacefully and quietly coexisting. Thank you, he whispers. He turns his head to look at the blonde, seeing those crimson irises staring back at him. For what? Kaken frowns. Saving me. Kaken clicks his tongue and shoves him lightly, making them both stumble to the side a little. You did most of it. Izuku throws his head back to look up at the sky, now clear of clouds after the snowfall from earlier. The stars are so beautiful tonight, shimmering and glimmering so brightly. Still, I'm glad it was you, he says. I'm glad you found me. Just then, they hear a small thump from the alley they just passed. Izuku stops dead in his track, straining his ear to see if he would hear something more, and then he hears another thump, louder this time. The freckled boy walks back to the alley, Kaken following closely behind, and when he looks down, he sees it. A cat, small and shivering, huddled in a small cardboard box. It looks so cold. He crouches down in front of it gently, extending his hand whilst being careful not to startle the animal. Their gazes meet, and Izuku smiles.